I decided to go for a lovely solo hike and camping trip in the Appalachian Trails. Well, not on the trails, but just off the sides of them. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in doing so, and I'd planned to be out there for about a week. I obviously had quite a lot of supplies with me, and I'd gone to an old military surplus to get one of those big rocks that the soldiers use. These things are extremely good, and it managed to get me really good stoves and other things while I was in the shop, so I was pretty happy. They basically gave me some little white cubes that you could light with a lighter, and they would burn for ages and you could do some food. I had lots of canned food with me, and I didn't carry too much because I was worried about becoming overcumbered and not being able to move much. Now, on about the fourth day of my hike, I hadn't encountered too many other people. There was actually one or two runners, which I thought was pretty weird because I couldn't figure out where they'd come from because I was now pretty deep in, but we always said a friendly hello. Some of them would opt to stop and chat for a while, and I actually enjoyed this. A lot of them told me that they couldn't really see me because of the camouflage in my backpack, and I thought that was pretty cool. I also had a raincoat which was camouflage, which is important to remember for later on in the story. Now, I eventually say goodbye to the couple of joggers that I encounter and say that I need to keep moving to get to the next post to set up camp, and everything's as it should be. For whatever reason, I wasn't feeling that great on this particular part of my journey. I don't think I was unwell, but just something on my body felt off. Every so often I would get like a sharp pain in my head that kind of felt like someone was stabbing the back of it. I was worried that a tick or something was biting me, but when I checked with my phone and mirror, there was nothing there. I actually had chicken pox when I was younger, and I still had some scars from it, so I was pretty convinced that this was the issue. So I continue on my hike. Now again, the scenery is really nice, but I suppose that's what you expect in places like this. I'd gone on a number of solo trips before, but I was starting to think that maybe I preferred being with other people out here. The only problem was I didn't really have that many friends that are experienced enough to go with me. A lot of my friends would say, yeah, let's do this and this, and that I'm trained and I know what I'm doing, but when we actually got out there, I pretty much had to babysit them the whole way through. This can be very annoying because you end up basically teaching the whole time, and they always seem to do something wrong. I had one friend that didn't have appropriate footwear and they got these terrible blisters, and I pretty much had to carry them for half of the trek, which really exhausted me. If any of you are going to go hiking in the future or camping, just please make sure that you have the correct shoes because you don't want to be playing games with your feet out here. It turned out that my friend actually got his foot wet and had an issue with some early onset of gangrene, and it was pretty nasty. You can imagine the smell too. I won't describe it here because it makes me feel a bit sick, but anyway. Those were my thoughts at the time. I was pretty relaxed now, and I start to feel a bit better as I get more into the sun. Eventually I have to stop because I need to urinate, and I do so. About halfway through, I have a strange sensation that something's about to happen. Weirdly, I'm pretty much always spot on when these things happen. As I know, I've had it a few times where I've gone onto a train quite late at night and had a weird feeling, and then some lunatic comes up to me. I think this has happened 3 or 4 times now, and I'm actually convinced I'm a little bit psychic to these things, but that was what I was thinking. Okay, maybe there's somebody about to creep up on me. So I stop and look around, and I don't see anyone. I decide to be a bit more brave now and actually call out hello, even louder this time, but I just hear my voice echoing in the distance. I go to turn and I hear a hissing sound, and I see something that freezes me to the spot. Probably not 2 foot in front of me is a very large brown snake. I think it was brown, but I couldn't really see because it was well camouflaged. And what's worse is I've just urinated on its head pretty much. It hasn't moved, but I can see it moving slowly, and I don't know what to do. I'm pretty sure I've at least offended this thing or annoyed it, because, I mean, who wants to have that happen to them? I count my breaths and try my best to calm myself down because I'm really starting to panic. I always thought I was somebody who was good at not overreacting to things, but there have been a few situations where I have, and this was one of them. I take one step back, then another, and another, and I slowly get away from this thing, and I start to hear my breath normalize a bit. I don't take my eyes off of this thing, and I slowly make my way back to my pack. I quickly grab it and do not take my eyes off this thing as I slowly make my way round the bend. What's worse, as I do so I notice another one not far off from it. I don't know if they were partners or if it was its mate, but it was almost like I went into a little snake den, urinated on them and didn't realise. Now this snake was pretty big. I can't really say how big it is because I was so singularly fixated on it that I couldn't get a size of it, but it would have had to have been about 3 feet or so long, maybe more. And not really what you want out here. That's a pretty good ticket to death. With my hands sweaty, I go to check the time on my phone so I know how much further I have to hike. I realise I haven't got signal here, and that really scares me. If that thing had bit me, then I don't really know what I would have done. I had a backup satellite phone and even that wasn't connecting because of the tree density. I actually dwell on this for quite a long time, and I tell myself that I have to be more careful. I jokingly say, "Sorry, Mr. Snakes, I have done something terrible today," and I slowly make my way through a clearing. Now, while doing so, I don't really feel settled. I'm not somebody who's ever experienced shock or anything. I had a pretty scary experience once where I got robbed, and one of my friends said, "Oh, you must be in shock," but I just wasn't. I just didn't care much. I was of course shook, but not too badly. But this felt different. My hands are quite sweaty, but I keep having this pounding feeling in my head. It's almost like something's terribly wrong. I get worried that maybe I've got some kind of cut or something, but every time I check I'm fine, and I keep putting it down to nerves attached to scar tissue from the time that I had smallpox as a child. But again, there's not really too much to suggest that this is the case, because every time I check I'm clear. Now eventually I make it up to my camping site and I'm really happy to get rested. I had a pretty long day, and it was enough to make me not enjoy my trip so much. I encountered a couple of friendly hikers, but from that point on, something just felt really off. So I eventually take my shoes off, put my socks on, the comfy ones that I have, and I just relax a bit. I start reading a book, and again I didn't really feel much of anything, but I realise I'm extremely tired now. It's kind of like dusky dawn. I don't know how you describe it, but when the sky is red but about to be nighttime, and I settle in. I didn't set up a fire though because it was warm enough not to need one, and I didn't want to cause too many issues here. I settle into my sleeping bag and I fall into a very deep sleep. Now, when I fall asleep, it's almost like I've been transported into another world. I open my eyes and I'm in a forest, just like the one that I was actually in. It's weird because I understood the similarity even though I was dozed off. I can see trees literally all around me, and there's something weird about this. Everything's just a little bit more red and dark than it should be. I wasn't actually sure I was dreaming at some points because how vivid it was, and I open up the tent door and step outside, really taking a good look at everything. Now, my tent looks completely different when I step out of it and I turn around and the thing's gone. There's also this weird deep bassy sound that's constantly following a rhythmic pattern in the background. It kind of sounds like if you're about to load a scary game and you know you've got some loading screen ambient sounds. Yeah, it's pretty much just like this. It was pretty worrying though for me because I've never experienced anything like it. I actually try and hit myself in the dream wondering if I'm actually asleep or not, but it doesn't make a difference. I look as far as I can and the trees seem to expand for miles and miles, and that's when I see it. only for a second, but something which I can only describe as being similar to the Grim Reaper suddenly appears in front of me. This thing is extremely tall, like maybe 10 feet tall, dressed in this very dark robe, with some kind of red dripping off of it staring down at me. Now it doesn't make a sound, but it's there for a second and it knows I can see it, and then it flashes away. I'm obviously pretty freaked out by this, and I can still hear the sounds increasing of this low rhythmic music, and I start to go further now. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of the back rooms, but it really feels like I'm in one of those. I ended up jogging, but every time I'm jogging, the horizon just seems to reset almost, like it's spawning in every so often. Like, I'm almost a hamster running in a treadmill on a simulation. I'm not really going anywhere. I can't find my tent, and I can hear taps every so often. It kind of sounds like somebody's throwing a stone in a large room, and it really creeps me out. I don't know what that thing is, and the further I go, the more sly I seem to be getting. Now, I become very sweaty at this point. I now look down towards my feet, and I feel like there's something wrong with the ground also. It really looks like it's almost melting. It's hard to describe, but you know when you see a heat wave, it's kind of like I'm staring at one of those, but I'm not. This is just normal. I actually start to scream out and become very anxious, but no sounds come out. I then eventually find what appears to be a way out of the woods, as they all seem to go off into one direction and one path finally. I start sprinting towards it. Now, I was probably sprinting towards this for a good 10 or so minutes before eventually slowing down. I turn back to look behind myself and I don't see anything. I turn back again and there's just trees upon trees. I don't seem to be getting much closer. I decide to make one last dash for it, and I sprint even quicker this time. I'm becoming aware of how hot I feel and how that everything feels different. Now, I eventually make it to the end, and just as I take one step towards what appears to be light, that thing appears again, this time standing dead in front of me like a guardian to the gates of hell. And then I snap out of it. I scream, and I'm suddenly back in my tent. I start feeling around to make sure that it's real and pinch myself, and I'm definitely awake now. I'm absolutely drenched in sweat and covered in some kind of weird liquid. It's almost got like a yellowy colour to it. I mean, it's not urine or anything that the snakes handed back to me, but it's definitely weird. It's almost like a glazing over my skin. I peel open the tent very slowly, scared that I'm gonna be there still, but luckily things are normal and it's morning dawn. Now I take a while to try and calm down, but I can never shake the feeling, and that headache seems to come back again with that pain just in specific areas, like somebody's got a needle on my brain. It felt really bizarre, and it kind of made me feel almost like I was gonna vomit and extremely uncomfortable. I pack up my things and then I notice something's odd. There are some carvings around where I was camped that definitely weren't there before, and things are different. I look and I can see some kind of skulls carved into the stones. This is definitely done relatively recently, but there's nobody around. It's like somebody's took a chisel and really perfectly carved out skeleton faces, but all of them have some kind of cracks like they've got damage. There was only 3 of them in total, but it's extremely odd. I'm not really sure what to make of it, and these are far too heavy to move, but this was really odd. It almost looks like ancient ones that maybe the Indians would have made from Native America, but I wasn't so sure this is actually what it is. I just have a really bad feeling that I've camped in the wrong place, and I quickly get my things together, load up the pack and head out. Now, when I'm walking, I just cannot shake the feeling that something's about to go wrong again. I don't have too much longer left on this trip, and I don't want to let the whole thing be ruined. The other thing too is I'm pretty scared that this is going to change my confidence for doing future expeditions like this on my own, and that was never my objective, so I just try my best to be brave. I stop and make one of my favourite coffees and just do all of my favourite things. I start eating some things that I really like and eating some gummy bears. I think the sugar rush made me feel much better and I start to forget about the things worrying me. I think that's one of the most important things in life and there's really an art to it, but in this situation it's definitely needed. I make sure that I drink lots of water now because I'm worried that something's wrong. But I eventually make it up to one of the stations and thank God there's a few more people there. They ask me what's wrong and honestly say that I look like I've seen something. They say, did an animal attack you? Did someone hurt you? Are you okay? I say, no, I'm fine, just tired. There's probably about 4 other people at this station and I'm really relieved to see more people. I then ask how their hike was going and they say that it was going pretty well, but there's been some reports of other campers and hikers seeing something looming in the woods. I asked them to describe it and they say it was almost like a tree was moving, and when I hear that, my heart drops. I suddenly think of the dream that I had the night before and I go to tell them saying, it could be anything. Are you sure it wasn't a tree falling? And they say no. And for whatever reason, my brain just shuts down and I almost feel like if I tell these people, they're going to think I'm insane and report me or something, so I decide that the best thing to do is not tell anyone. I know it's a pretty selfish thing to do, but by the way, it was only a dream I had, so would I be crazy to think anything of it? I think so, and decide that everything's okay. I fill up on the supplies and I start to feel better and have some normal conversations, and you know what happened? I almost completely forgot about it. I think I just needed to reconnect with more humans and I'm able to completely forget about the things that are worrying me and I feel much happier. I can feel myself smiling again and I had a really good time, and I've actually stayed in contact with one of the people I met there. We've actually went on a number of hikes together since and I've really had a great time. But anyway, I'm going away from my point here. So, after a really nice evening, the morning breaks and it's time for me to go on my merry way. This part of the hike is actually my favourite. The trees all appear very varied here and the light is piercing down ever so beautifully. There's a few butterflies and everything, and honestly this is more like an image of heaven, which is in big contrast to my dream previously, but at the time I'd forgotten about the dream. I continue, and I seem to be getting further and further away from what I know. The path that I'm on is just kind of like gravel, but you know, the one that's only really formed because of people walking on it a lot. It feels nice to know where I'm going and that other people probably come here on a regular basis. That's when a jogger comes to overtake me. Now weirdly, I didn't seem to hear them coming up on me. They just seemed to go right around me. I say, oh sorry, half expecting them to say, oh sorry in return, but they don't say anything. They just jog off ahead of me. I stopped to watch them jog off. I don't know why, I just kind of felt like doing it and just to take a break for a moment, and they eventually do so. And that's when I hear the sounds of stones being thrown. And some kind of deep echo, like something was thrown in a very large concrete room. The sound seemed to bounce for too long, almost like it's coming from a cave, but we're outside here. It doesn't happen too often, but maybe every 5 or so minutes, but I realise that this is exactly what I heard in the dream, and I'm being taken over by the fear now. I convince myself that it's nothing to worry about, but I know something's definitely off. It was kind of like I was going back to the place I was scared of. I closed my eyes for a few seconds to try and calm down, and that's when I see it again. I can see a kind of animal skull face for a couple of seconds. It's very faint, but I'm certain I've seen it, and I now realise that something's really off here. I kind of cough to clear my throat and say, hey, anyone. wanting to hear a familiar voice back, but I don't hear anything. The other hikers weren't actually coming my way, and I don't know where the jogger is gone, but something felt weird now. Up to my right, the trees become very dark and shadowy, and I'm almost sure that I could see movement at first. I can see something dancing through the trees, and I presume it's just a jogger as they're getting away from me, but something felt different now. I decide now that I have to get back to another station, because when I get to this one I've pretty much completed my trip and I'll be able to hike out to the cars again in the morning. So I haven't got too much further to go now. I've really picked up the pace, but while I'm walking I keep hearing that sound again of the stones being thrown, and also some kind of faint drum. It seems very deep, but it seems to be getting quicker and quicker in tempo the further on I go. I ended up holding my head and closing my eyes again, hoping to make sense of this, but it doesn't. I start pinching myself to make sure that I'm not in a dream, but it definitely wasn't. I managed to put these feelings to the side, and eventually I don't hear much of anything, but something was off. I ended up getting to where the station is and where that I'm going to set up camp, and there's no one around. I suppose it is probably a good thing because I wanted some peace and quiet here. I began setting up my tent very early because, I don't know, I just didn't want to do that in nightfall. I decided to take a good look at the surrounding area, and I actually go up a tree a little bit just to try and see anyone or anything. I'm not really good at climbing, but the way the branches are on this tree, it almost makes a ladder. I get about halfway up when one of the branches snaps and I scream out a swear word. I throw the branch on the floor and actually punch the tree stupidly, but that was fine. At least the ones underneath me didn't give way. I'm able to take a really nice look around now, and I don't see anything again. I decided that the best thing that I could do now is make a nice cup of decaf coffee and try and enjoy the sunset that I can kind of see through the trees, and I do just that. Now maybe the sugar, or lack thereof should I say, and the familiar flavour kind of settled me again, and I think, yeah, you're just overthinking, maybe it's time to lay off some of the solo hikes for a while. And I quietly agree with myself. I eventually watch the sun go down and I go back into my tent, but I'm not settled. I'm alert, and it's almost like I'm waiting for something to happen. You might be wondering what was going to happen, and to be honest, so was I. I couldn't say what it is because nothing was putting me in danger now, but I had the feeling that I was watching things happen. Almost like if you're in a movie and you know there's going to be a jump scare. That kind of feeling, but maybe not as intense. It was a pretty weird one that I hadn't felt to this degree before. I eventually closed my eyes and drift off for a few seconds before waking up and quickly closing the tent. I almost hit myself for being stupid and not closing the tent because I'm not really worried about the thing outside, but just other people or creatures. I have my things together, and I'm holding my flask using the warmth for some kind of comfort. I kind of get halved into a dreamy state when I can suddenly hear a sound again. Now again, it's almost like a very, very distorted sound of a low tempo wind, or low in tone. It's almost like if you've got just enough air coming through a window, but almost like you'd hear it in a cave, but things are different again. I open up my eyes and it's just like last time, but I didn't remember it in the moment. I'm in my tent and this time it feels different. Where I am now is actually much more cold. The ground feels hard, almost too hard, like granite I guess. I slowly unzip my tent and it's much more bright out. I look around and I can only describe it as a giant cave. It's weird because everything's almost slightly too bright, almost like you're halfway to heaven, but I'm inside some kind of cave and I can hear air rushing through everything. It's such a creepy horror movie sound. It really could be used for anything, I think, and I don't want to try and recreate it because I don't like the memories of it. but it was really harrowing to say the very least. Now I'm much more confused now because obviously I'm not in the forest and I don't know if I'm dreaming. So I try and pinch myself, but not much makes a difference, and I think maybe I am actually awake now. I was incredibly confused, and I know I have to get out of here. I get myself up off the ground again. I look around and there's nothing, just like last time. Now, I need to make my way out of this, and the ground feels very cold and wet. The ground's now covered in some kind of low level of white liquid. It feels like water, but once you take your hand off of it, it immediately disappears. And I kept feeling like I had it on my skin, but every time I went to wipe it, there was nothing there. It was almost like something very cold had touched me, and that made me think that there was water on me when in fact there wasn't anything. Now I look up ahead, and I can see that this stretches for miles and miles. I look around, and it's the same the other way, and I wonder if I'm actually trapped here. I look behind myself, and that's when I see it again. This strange tall creature just glaring at me, but this time different. It's hard to describe, but kind of like a slender man, but almost a bit more thick. I actually look over towards where a face should be, but again there's nothing there. And while I do so, I hear a voice that tells me run. This sounded like it was coming from directly behind myself, but I know nobody's there and this is silly, it shouldn't be happening. But I had to listen to it, and I turn around and start sprinting. And it's almost like the ground is moving with me, like I'm running on a treadmill. The scenery isn't changing, and I realise this and come to a stop again. I look behind, and now there's a wall closing me in. I start running forwards just a little bit quicker now, and the ambient sound is increasing, again with some kind of knocking or something. While I'm running ahead, I can see the ground forming, and it's almost like there's nothing but white air below me, if that makes sense, almost like everything else is covered in some kind of fog. I run like this for a very long time, until I realise that I'm not making it out of here. That's when suddenly I hear a voice again, telling me just to move. I don't know if this is in my head, and I start hitting my face, but it doesn't do anything. I stop until I eventually collapse on the ground, and just like that, I can see something running towards me. It's those creatures again, but lots of them, not just one this time. They're coming closer and closer to me, and I pull myself up off the ground. I then see another one of those, but this time it felt almost warm, pointing me in a direction. It has what looks like a large stick, which is very dark for a finger, but it's pointing me towards some light. I then hear it telling me to run into the light, and that's just what I do. I run, and eventually I see a very large pool of water. The creature is then floating next to me and tells me to jump, and that's what I do. I jump and land in the water, and within seconds I'm immediately flashed back to the real world. Now I wake up and I scream. It took me about 5 or 6 seconds to actually normalise and I get my bearings. I wonder why I'm so sweaty, and I think it was just a nightmare that I had, but when I go to take off some of my clothes I realise that I'm covered in water. And you know what? This is exactly like what I'd seen in the dream, very cold and white in colour. I say, what the hell is happening to me? And I start to dry myself off quickly. I think maybe I've got some kind of weird medical condition, but what could I have had? Why did it link into my dream? I now lay collapsed on the floor for probably 10 minutes and fall asleep again. Except this time nothing happened, and I wake up feeling a lot better now. When I get up I realise that I'm still a little bit wet, but it seems to be more like normal sweat this time, and I look around and I hesitantly put my hand on the tent opening. I don't want to open the door this time because I don't know what's going to be out there. I tell myself to calm down and that everything's okay, and I slowly unzip the tent. I make my way out and everything's as it should be. I let out a really big sigh of relief and everything's as it should be again. I laid there for probably about another 20 minutes until the sun kind of rises enough that I should be able to make my way the rest of the way out of there, and I feel great now. Great in the sense that I'm not in immediate danger, and I tell myself that I need to go to the doctor because no one should be dreaming like this. This is really horrifying for me. And I dust myself off and pack up my things, and I see it. Another skull. Just like the one I'd seen before, but how? It looks like somebody's chiseled it in again, but not recently, like this had occurred about 500 years ago. But it's right next to where I was camping. I didn't even realise the rock before and it's embedded in the ground, but how could that be? I go to touch it until my hands start shaking, and I don't think this is a good idea. And I tell myself that you just have to make it out of here. Now I know everything could have just been a dream in my head, but it gets weirder. At least I'm telling myself that at the time, that this is all just a dream and everything's fine. While walking through the forest, it felt really weird this time. I didn't have that much further to go now, and something just felt really odd. I don't know, I couldn't describe it. But it was almost like I'd seen too much, and like I was a soldier coming back from war, completely out of place with whatever bright or positive environment that you left me in. It was almost like my senses wouldn't let me switch off, and that I was in somewhere but was constantly out of place. I'm forever looking around myself trying to find answers. I keep checking over my body for any signs of what could have been happening to me. I was just really hoping that maybe I had some kind of cut, maybe some kind of injury or illness that would explain all of this, but everything is like it should have been. I desperately hope that I can see some kind of hikers or anyone who can just put their arm around me and say it's okay, because this time I feel like I desperately need help, but again it doesn't come. I make it about halfway out when I set up my camp again. I feel impossibly tired now. And I think it was just from the mental fatigue and exhaustion because of how intense these dreams are. I collapse and I only have time really to set up my sleeping bag. I couldn't be bothered to set up the tent properly, and I'm kind of half in one, if that makes sense. My legs are sticking out, but I don't really care. It's daytime and I've set an alarm on my watch to go off in about 2 hours. Now I fall asleep again. And this time when I wake up in my dream, things are a lot more normal now. I'm in the same forest that I was last time, and there's no weird colours. Everything looks normal, just a little bit too dark. I'm aware that I'm in a dream now, but it doesn't feel as threatening as before. I walk around and not really sure what to do, sit down on a rock, and that's when I notice it. There's a presence that's just appeared to the left side of where I'm sitting. I turn around and I see it, face to face with a huge animal kind of skeleton that I can't describe. I don't know how it got there, but this thing was massive. Probably like the size of 2 basketballs or something if it was to double in size. And it just stares at me. Frozen to the spot, I hear a voice now. In fact, it sounds like multiple voices talking at the same time, and it tells me, do not take that bridge. I was very confused because I was actually planning on taking a bridge home that day on the drive. And I say, what do you mean? And then it suddenly disappears and I'm awoken again. Now, as you can imagine, I was pretty scared, but I was actually getting more angry by the moment. I was tired of being haunted by whatever this thing is, and I was ready to check myself in for help because this isn't normal. I quickly get my things together, and I brush off some insects that actually climbed on top of the sleeping bag, but I didn't care. I get everything together and I start hiking. I hike like a madman now. I actually forgot to drink water and start guzzling it, and I was almost vomiting because I drank far too much too quickly. I have to make it a bit further until eventually I make it to the car park and salvation. What was even better now is that there's lots of other people around. They look at me like I'm a little bit crazy, but I think that's just because I look so exhausted and tired. Someone says, am I okay? And I say, yeah, I just had a rough hike, and they say, oh, no worries, be careful, buddy. I don't actually reply because I'm so lost in my thoughts, and I load up everything into my car, not really sure what to make of my whole experience. I think maybe I have this thing called nightmare syndrome, I think that's what it's called, but where every time you fall asleep you have quite a scary, intense dream, and it can be very tiring. I'm not so sure though, but I know I need to tell somebody about it. The only person that I know will really understand and believe me is my brother, so I decide that that's what I should do. Now I load up everything and I just sit there for a few seconds. I have to calm myself down enough to drive and to actually think about the way that I need to go. Now I have a few options here. One is more of a dirt road, backcountry route, but I decide not to take it. That's going to take me across quite an old bridge, which is pretty high up off the ground and has some running water below it, and I don't know, it could have been a weird coincidence, but I just knew I shouldn't have taken that bridge. It's kind of weird, it was almost like something that I knew and that I was 100% aware of, but nobody really instructed me other than that weird dream I had. So I decided to take the much longer route around, and I text my brother to say that I'm going to be over soon. He says great, I can't wait to hear all about this hike. He doesn't have a clue what's happened, but my god I do. I start driving and all is normal. I flick on the radio and realise that I'm going towards a bridge. For whatever reason I decide that now I should just turn back and go the way that I'd planned before, the longer route, and I do so. I get back into the right lane and I get across to my brother eventually. Some of my friends have asked me, well, what happened during the drive, but kind of nothing. I guess I was so deep in thought that it kind of made time lapse almost. I can't really remember much of it, which is also strange, but I guess I just had far too much on my mind in that moment. Now, eventually I make it to my brother and pull in, and he's already on the drive and says, God, thank God you're here, I was worried sick about you. I say, yeah, it just took a while, I drove the long way. And he said, no, come here, quick. He grabs me and he shows me something. On the news you can see that the bridge has collapsed and somebody was on it. Somebody unfortunately lost their life as the bridge collapsed and their car went straight into the water below with very fast running water. They would have had no chance to survive it. My brother actually had tears in his eyes because he thought it was me that day. Now that's when it suddenly dawns on me. I don't really believe in guardian angels. Whatever I saw was more similar to the Grim Reaper, but I don't know what it could have been. I really think something was sent there, in whatever dimension it was, to communicate with me, to warn me about something very dangerous happening, and if that hadn't have happened, I probably would have died on that bridge. I really don't know what my story is getting at here, but I just want people to listen and understand what happened to me. I just have too many questions, but now I've come to find more peace and kind of warm feelings from my story. I think whatever spirits are out there, you have good and bad ones, and this may have been a good one that protected me that day. I told my brother about everything that happened and he couldn't believe it at first. He actually thinks it was a guardian angel that saved me, and he believes in me, thankfully, and that's all I need, just one other person to believe my story. Thank you for listening to this because it's kind of great for me to get it out of my system. I hope there's more people who can survive things because of weird occurrences like this, but it's still pretty creepy what happened. If it was my guardian angel, then I wish it didn't look so scary. I've worked a couple of jobs, and my current one's completely different to the one that I used to do. I was a fire ranger for a little while, but I ended up giving it up because I didn't really like the isolation, and there was just other things on my horizon. Now, at the time, me and my current girlfriend, now wife, had decided to go out on a trip to a park. There was lots of deers and mooses and other animals that she wanted to see, so I happily obliged to go with her. Now, to get to this park in the first place took a long time, and I had quite a lot of water with me because from my training before, I was always cautious of us becoming dehydrated. We had to follow a really big brick wall to get into the entrance of this place, and it was weird because this wall didn't actually show up on our maps before. We eventually make it to where we want to go, and we realise that there's a trail that takes you off into the woods. I believe it was a national park, but I can't be certain, but it looks really nice, so we decided to head out this way. We had some carrots and other things with us at the time so we can actually feed the animals. And I'm a little cautious, but I think it's best if we just try and throw some carrots at them. My girlfriend also brought some oats or things like that for them to eat, and we were just having a nice day. Now, we did see some people initially, but the further we went on, the less likely that it would be we'd see anyone, and eventually there's no one but us. We eventually come across some pretty small deers. There's mostly females with a few males, and apparently during this time of year they can actually be a bit dangerous. I didn't notice it at the time because I didn't care too much about researching it, and we see some and I try and throw some carrots at them. Eventually they start eating it, which I think is quite funny. Now, while I'm crouched down, I notice a really foul smell, and I think maybe one of them has something wrong with it. It's pretty weird. I look around and I can see some much bigger animals now just further off. Nothing to worry about, maybe it's just a moose or something, and I decide to keep on feeding these deers. I do this for a while, and eventually one of the males comes walking towards me, and it actually worried me a bit because he wasn't big but he wasn't small. I was half ready to have to fight, but he just come up and took one of the carrots off me, and I thought this was quite cute. Now, we're feeding them for a while, and eventually they all seem to run off somewhere, and we decide that we want to go a bit further. Now, we had some supplies and we decided to eat. I had some sandwiches that we had made before, and I'm very cautious about how I eat it because I'm quite germophobic and I don't want to get any of that nasty stuff on my hands. Now, after not too long, we decide to head off again. We're now going quite a lot deeper into the woods now. We don't really have a direction, but I know roughly where we come from, and I'm pretty good with my bearings because of my previous work as a fire ranger. Now, I make it a bit further in, and we have to stop because my girlfriend needs to pee. So while this is happening, I go off a little bit further just to make sure nobody's around, because I knew we'd get in trouble for that. I look up ahead, and there seems to be another moose. This one again is much bigger than all the others, and it appears very white, almost too white, and I'm very curious about this. For some reason I have a gut feeling not to approach this one, though I do have my carrot in my hand at all times. It sounds silly, but this actually made me feel much more safe. Now eventually this moves behind some trees, but I always keep an eye on it. My girlfriend comes back and says that I can see it too, and wants to go and feed it, but for some reason I have an idea that we should just stay back. It gets closer and closer and seems to come weirdly close for what's normally a very timid animal. It eventually goes off. I thought that was pretty bizarre. I know to keep my distance, so. Now, sorry if I do get these mixed up, because I can confuse deers with moose because they all look exactly the same to me, but you know what I mean. Just like the deers with the horns and stuff. Well, only the male ones, but you get the point. Now eventually this goes off, and we follow up roughly where this has went. We think maybe there's going to be a nice family of them, and we're going to be able to get some nice pictures. My girlfriend also brought her camera with her at the time, so there's lots of things we can take pictures of. Now the trees are quite dense on either side of us, so I know that if there are any, they're probably not going to be able to run and charge or do anything like that. So I feel a little bit safer. Now, although this is about November time, it's really beautiful outside and really nice and sunny. Now, I'm feeling a little bit dehydrated and I start to feel a headache come on, so I just slammed some water. The only problem is it made me need to pee like a racehorse and I can't stop now. But I notice every time that I'm stopping to pee, I have a feeling that I'm being watched. I know it sounds a bit cliche and everybody seems to say that, but I don't know, it just felt different again. Almost like there was something different here. I could almost cut the tension with a knife, but I didn't decide to tell my girlfriend that and we just continued on. We've heard that there should be a lake close to here, and my girlfriend wants to go and feed the ducks and things there with some bread that she bought. To be honest, I wasn't that interested in it, I was just kind of happy to be outside and felt quite peaceful. Now it took a long while before eventually we can see something. We can hear some grunting sounds and we both stop. Dead up ahead of us, one of these deers or moose, whatever it is, comes sprinting up ahead of us. It goes right past us and my god did that thing get close. I was actually quite scared because how big this thing is, and it runs off. It was almost like it was being chased, and then we realised it was. Another larger one actually comes past and runs after it. I thought that was pretty bizarre because it seemingly come out of nowhere, but it was definitely enough to put me on edge. There wasn't much I could do to defend myself. I mean, I could have a big stick, but it's just going to snap off, and I don't think these things would go for me. I have a carrot though, thinking they're probably just angry and hungry, so I can always throw that on the ground if needed. We eventually come up near the lake and it looks absolutely beautiful. Now, there's no ducks or anything, so we just keep going now. We stop for a moment to eat some more food that we had, and that's when I hear it. I can hear the sound of somebody calling out. It sounds just like my girlfriend, and I say, "Hey, what'd you say?" And she looks at me, confused, still eating. I say, "Oh, nothing, I thought I heard you saying something to me." And we continue eating, I don't think much of it. I couldn't make out words, but it did sound odd. We eventually get up again and keep going. Now, we eventually make it a bit further, and the forest is really beautiful here. We decide that we're not going to go too much beyond because we don't want to be here all day, and I had quite a lot of things I needed to do when I got home, so sticking around wasn't really an option for me. Now we continue on into the forest a little bit further, and that's when I see them. Lots and lots of deers, but much bigger than before. There seems to be more males now, and also I heard something. There was clearly some other girl not too far away from where we were, and I can't make out exactly where she was. It almost sounds like she's calling out for us, saying, "Hey, come over here, come quick." I asked my girlfriend if she hears it, and she does, but weirdly, she doesn't make out the sounds as clearly as I do, and I say, "God, it sounds just like you, isn't that odd?" I know it can't be my girlfriend because obviously she's next to me, but this is pretty strange, and we continue walking. It's now I note that it seems incredibly bright where we are, and it looks almost too perfect. Almost like somebody's turned up the brightness too much, or contrast I guess, on a camera. And I don't know, it just felt a bit creepy. It almost felt like, not the back rooms, but we had entered the backwoods. It seems like the trees go on impossibly too far now. And I don't know, everything just feels different. Every so often, I'm convinced that I can see people up ahead. It almost looks like some of the trees are moving, but I convinced myself it was just my eyes and everything's how it should be. So we keep pressing onward once again, and now we never seem to be getting much closer to the deers. It's almost like they're not moving, but we're not getting closer. Granted, I couldn't see any sitting down, but I still think this is an entirely weird experience. Now, I don't want to go too much further, but I almost felt drawn in. And we'd come all this way, why not just get those pictures that we wanted? No, I wasn't stupid, I wasn't going to try and throw carrots at these things because they're much bigger. But I don't know, I didn't feel like I was in too much danger. Now, again, the colour of the trees seemed to be changing to a brighter colour, almost having like a golden glow, which is really bizarre. I looked around and this is the first time that I felt a bit worried. Everywhere looked exactly the same. It was almost like we'd been walking in a loop now for a little while. None of the scenery changed whatsoever, and that was pretty bizarre. What's more odd is that we couldn't see these animals that we were trying to get up to. It was almost like they'd just entirely disappeared suddenly. It's pretty bizarre. We decided that we should just continue on the kind of path that we can see. But again, that's another weird thing. It's almost like there was a natural path, like a kind of clearing, but there shouldn't have been. Clearly this isn't a trail that we're on, and we're a couple of miles away from where we started. Probably more than a few, but we seem to be walking a path. Now, the trees seem almost like if you ever played the video game Halo, but more similar to those, just quite tall, and just almost looking like they don't belong to Earth. I'm starting to feel quite concerned now, and I decided to stop and tell my girlfriend that, hey, we could chase these all day and never find them. My girlfriend says, yeah, and I keep thinking I hear that girl. We decide that now's a good time to head back. We stop for a moment just to catch our breaths again, and just to drink some more water. And it almost felt like I'd stepped into a dream here. Everything looked so beautiful and perfect, but it just felt so off. And I also didn't recognise the area whatsoever. It's like we'd stepped into another biome almost, and I didn't like it at all. Now, after deciding to head back, we get our things together and start heading off in the exact opposite direction that we come. Now, I knew that if we followed the way back, we should come back to civilization. And everything's as it seemed. Nicely now, the scenery seems to change a little bit and seems more normal, but the kind of golden glow doesn't seem to escape. I actually confirmed this with my girlfriend because I didn't think to mention it at the time, but she also said she experienced the same thing. It was almost like somebody put a filter on everything around us. Now we walk for a good 15 minutes and stop again. We're pretty much exactly where we started, just where the trees seem to be changing colour to that weird glow. We look around and again, everything looks exactly the same. There's only this path ahead of us that seems to stretch for miles and miles, but we've walked on this. How are we not getting any further out of here? I suddenly decide that we actually need to go off the path a bit, and my girlfriend's a little bit hesitant, but I don't feel like we have much of a choice now. So we continue going, and there's a weird smell again that comes over us. Now I can just about see what I think is the way back, and we continue heading up here. Now we've been out for probably half of the day now, and to be honest I was getting quite tired. My eyes were also suffering a bit because even though I had sunglasses on, it didn't seem to be helping with the brightness. And then I hear a voice calling out for help once again. Completely confused because it sounds like the voice we heard throughout the day. I stop and so does my girlfriend. My girlfriend goes to speak, but I make her stop and I just listen. I can hear somebody saying, "Help, please help, I'm lost." And I look at my girlfriend and tell her to stand back a bit, and I go off to investigate myself. I had a feeling that it wasn't somebody actually lost because it just didn't sound right. It was almost more like somebody was following us saying it than an actual person in danger. It was either a group of people all exactly the same in terms of voice and tone, all lost at the exact same time. or it was something more weird. I definitely think it was something more odd than not, and I try and go a bit further up ahead. I'm trying my best to act brave, but I was really struggling. All I had was a carrot to defend myself, and I thought, well, if it's one of those things, I'm going to launch it at it. Well, if it's anything, I'm going to throw the carrot, and maybe that'll give me some time. I get closer and closer, and just off to the side of the trees that I can't actually see is a voice. I go to scream, "Hey, what are you doing?" But my voice goes completely weak, and I kind of scratched out a sound. That's when I see it. It doesn't really look like any of the other animals that I've seen today, but a much bigger version, and I can see this kind of moose deer animal walk out. But this one's fur looks a lot different, and his eyes look almost like a yellowy red colour. It then looks at me for a second, and I can still hear that sound. It almost looks as though it's coming from exactly where that moose is, not far from it, but the moose isn't moving its mouth whatsoever. And then it stands up, almost like it's about to gallop or something. Stands up very tall, probably 7 feet, and walks into the forest, and I'm not joking. I didn't even think it was possible for these animals to walk upright like that, and I start slowly tracing back. I can't hear the voice calling out for help now, and I quickly jog back to my girlfriend. She looks almost like she's too shocked to move, bless her, and I have to grab her hand. That confirms to me that we've both seen the exact same thing, and we start heading back. I don't know what way we were coming, but I know we have to get further from this. I keep on hearing that voice though calling out for help. It sounds like it's getting further from us as we jog, but I'm sure that was coming from right where that animal was. We jog for quite a while, and we eventually make it up to a hill that I recognise. My girlfriend was crying as we're running, and I tell her that she's got to be strong because if you go a week now, it's going to be harder for us to escape. Now weirdly, there was no other animals as we're jogging, and that strange tone seemed to slowly fade away and the normal colours returned. Probably the strangest thing about all of this is the way that the colours were changing. It wasn't the colours of the trees, but like a filter over everything. Even the sky looked different. My girlfriend also told me that she didn't see any clouds whatsoever when we were in that area, but as soon as we got back to the more normal area, there was quite a few of them. We jogged back for quite a while, and we eventually have to rest again because we've been going for so long. We make it back to relative safety, and we stop. Both of us are there, frantically trying to get our breaths back, trying to figure out what had just happened. And we decide that we should just keep going. Now we eventually pass where the lake is, and that actually makes me feel a lot more safe. Now while walking, I realise that there's quite a few mooses appearing and deer things, but these look a lot more normal. None of them have that weird look in their eye, and they're much more scared than we are of them. I think this is really odd, and I kind of collapse next to the lake. I then get up and realise something else is weird. There's no people around, like literally no one. We should have passed at least one other person by now, or maybe two, but there seems to be nobody at all. While laying there collapsed on the side, my girlfriend says, "Look, look." And I can see the hat of a ranger. Mind you, I can only see the silhouette of them, but standing perfectly on the tree line that we've just come from seems to be a ranger. I can't make out much of their face because of the shadow from the hat, but I don't know, something just seemed different. I go to wave to them, thinking that maybe I've gone somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and I can just say that I was a ranger before for the fire towers, but they don't seem to acknowledge me at all. Now this person does not move whatsoever, not even an inch, and I have this painful feeling in my belly like I'm gonna vomit, and I grab my girlfriend's hand and say, "Just let's go." I don't know how we wouldn't have encountered a ranger up until that point, but it's something I can investigate later, and we continue back the way that we had come originally. Now, I really need to emphasize that because of the adrenaline of the situation, it was almost like when you try and run in a dream but you're not capable of it, like everything's 60% slower. My legs absolutely felt like jelly at this point, and we still had quite a long way to go. It was beginning to get a little bit colder now, and we know that nightfall wasn't far off. We keep on going though, however, trying to be brave as we can. Now again, we start to see more normal animals, and weirdly there's nobody else around, but I realise that we've probably passed this place's closing time. Eventually I can see that familiar wall that I saw before, and I make a beeline towards it with my girlfriend. We eventually get back there, and we stop near the wall for a minute. We can hear the sounds of cars again near a road, and it's honestly one of the most refreshing things I've ever heard in my life. You wouldn't think something that's usually annoying could be so pleasant, but it really was. And we eventually walk back to where we had parked. In the car, both of us are in silence, until eventually I try and say, "What do you think happened?" My girlfriend then decides that she could call in to the station near there and see if they've got anybody out and just explain what had happened. She starts to relay the story and says, "Can we talk to the ranger that's based there?" And they say then that none of the rangers are actually on patrol currently, and we figure out the timings and it wouldn't have made sense. The last they went out was early in the morning, before we'd even got there, and they'd spent most of the day back at the station dealing with their things. Then, after explaining what we saw, we get a stupid answer saying, "Yeah, they probably do that sometimes. Maybe it was just an injured one that you saw." I then asked to take the phone and speak to the ranger, saying that, "No, what we saw was one of them stand up and we both saw the same thing and its eyes just look weird." And they kind of semi-laughed and say, "Yeah, they get unwell sometimes and they can do weird things." He tells me not to let my mind play tricks on me out in the woods and just to get home safely. I try and continue my story, but he says, "Yes, sir, it's just have a safe trip home, there's nothing to worry about, we'll take care of it." And with that the call ends, and I was really annoyed. I swear and hit the top of my steering wheel, and my girlfriend's upset now. It seems weird enough that there wasn't another ranger out there, but why were they denying that they'd actually seen anything out of the ordinary ever and that we're lying to them basically? It almost feels like they're hiding something, or they don't want to believe it, or maybe they know something that we don't, but that part really annoyed me. We eventually make it back home and kind of passed out. I actually slept for about 12 hours, and weirdly, it was almost like my eyes were burned from the sun the next day. It was like, you know when it snows and it's too bright and it messes up your eyes a bit the next day? It was like that. And my girlfriend actually had the same thing. I want to tell you my story because I want others to hear what we had experienced. If any of you have had anything similar before, please let me know. It's just really odd. I don't know what thing I saw that day. I don't know if anybody was actually lost out there. Maybe it was a ranger trying to find a lost person, but why wouldn't have the ranger station known that? Who was calling out for us? I guess I don't know, and I probably don't want to. Now, I was somewhere in the middle of the White Mountains in summer when I walked into what looks like a scene from a horror movie. A person with zero hiking, camping experience or anything had gotten themselves into big trouble. It was around 7 AM when I found the campsite. The first thing that hit me was the eerie stillness, until I noticed that shredded under a tree was a desperate looking human figure, clearly attacked by something quietly whimpering. I put my bag down, grabbed my kit and went over to the person. They appeared like they'd lost a sword fight with somebody with 4 arms, with slashes everywhere. Now, I patched him up the best I could, gave him water, checked my map, and hightailed it to the closest road. This is before cell phones were super prevalent and barely worked in the mountains. Thankfully, the road was very close by, less than 2 miles, and I was able to flag someone down. They took off and I wait for assistance to arrive. It took about an hour until the rescue team comes, and I led them until we find the still unidentified person. I was sure that he'd be dead before they arrived, but it was wrong. I assist in the rescue attempt and actually help him get out of there. After cleaning myself up, I went on my way, leaving them my number to call and let me know what was up with the person and if they needed any more help. I got home 3 days later, and there was a message on my machine. The story is that the guy I found decided to camp one day, and he heard that he had to keep food hung from trees to keep bears away. Well, he didn't do that. He put it almost directly over his tent, not high enough. So the night before I come upon his site, a bear had used the tree and attempted to climb up the tree to get the food, and the guy had awoken and finds 4 black bear paws sinking into his body. The dude survived and swore to the hospital staff that he was never moving into the woods again and moved straight to the city. Now, I was hunting public land with my dad, several miles from anything close to a trail, so the day goes by and not much is going on. Weather's crappy and I'm not hearing distant gunshots, so I reckon the deer aren't moving much. I radio to the old man that I'm gonna head back, and we make plans to rendezvous where we'd split up in the morning. 20 or so minutes later, I was kneeling around the edge of a pond, stripping off the bulk of my camo layers. I was just messing around, putting my stuff in a bag and listening to music on my headphones. I can remember that I may have taken off my blaze orange hat, but I can't remember for sure. Now, I had my appropriate gear on to show that I was a hunter, though, is what I mean. As I was digging through my bag, I thought I heard the faint bass of somebody yelling, so I took off an earbud and I noticed that, crouched on the opposite side of the pond, there was a lone forest ranger kind of just watching me. I stood up but didn't wave, and I wasn't sure that he'd even yelled at me in the first place, so I didn't holler anything to him. We just kind of locked eyes for a few minutes. To be clear, we weren't doing anything illegal. My rifle was unloaded by that point, and we were following all the laws and regulations correctly. I hunched my bag over, pulled out my walkie-talkie and radioed to my dad. Yeah, we've got company. My motives weren't anything though. I just wanted my dad to come down and help me. Now when I looked up, maybe 15 seconds later, the ranger was gone. Had completely gone, so eventually I met back up with my dad and started to tell him about what had happened. Yeah, as deep back in here as we are, he probably thought you're up to no good on that trail. Sometimes they get ambushed like that. As somebody who gets nervous, anxious around cops, it never occurred to me that I could be causing similar anxiety to them. But I still don't know exactly who it was or if it definitely was a ranger. So this happened about 20 years ago while hunting with my dad in northern BC. It was a cold October morning and it was still dark when we parked the truck and started our hike into a clear cut. I was familiar with the area as we had moose hunted there before. My dad went left and I went right and made my way to the top of the slope to get a better view of the clear cut. I found a stump to sit on and took up my binoculars and quickly found out that my dad had made it into the clear cut across the mountain. As soon as I spotted him, I heard something heavy move behind me in the forest about 40 yards away. Yes, a moose, I think. I then head towards the forest edge when I hear a scream like I've never heard before. It didn't sound human and wasn't like any animal I've heard before. It was so loud and I swear that my soul left my body for a couple of seconds. I turned around and ran down that clear cut as quick as I could. When I got to my dad, he said that he had heard it too and found me in his binoculars running down the clear cut then looked up to the forest edge and said that he saw a big hairy human-like creature about 8 feet tall standing between 2 birch trees. It stayed for a few seconds and then slowly turned around, going into the forest. We got in the truck and went home. Now, we asked the elders and their relatives about it, and they said apparently they're called forest guardians. It still scares the heck out of me. I used to work as a fire spotter in a remote tower deep in the woods. Now, at any given day, the only human around for miles would be me. For a couple of weeks, every time it approaches sunwest, I'd finish for the day, everything would go weirdly quiet, almost like clockwork. It stood out because it wasn't normal. Now, there's usually more noise around at that time of the day. Along with this, every time I left the cabin to climb down, there was some unnerving feeling of being watched. But for a while, it was only when climbing down. After that, I started to get the same feeling while on the ground, and it somehow felt much closer and more menacing. Can only liken it to knowing you're being watched or hunted or stalked. Not overly great when it's a 100-meter walk back to the car with nothing between you but you and whatever else could be out there. Now, this continued on for another couple of weeks, but I started hearing kind of chirps and calls. They stood out as everything was dead quiet. Then, one day while walking back across the clearing to the car, there was a long, low guttural growl somewhere else behind me, and I noped out of there as quick as I could. And afterwards, I go back towards the car and the base of the ladder. Everything was like an open ground with angry sounding things. God knows what was lurking around. A few days later, when I was driving back out, I spotted movement on the upside of the road, looked down again as it disappears into the tree line. It seemed to be hanging around whatever it was until the end of the season, as still and quiet as it could be. I still don't know what this was, but maybe it was a skinwalker, but who knows. I was out at my parents' place shooting on an old range. After we're done, my friend went off to take a leak behind some bushes. After he was done, he says, "Hey, come see this." I walked in to see what he's looking at. It looked as though a canvas butcher's apron was hung up from a tree to form a kind of pouch, about 4 feet off the ground. There were blood stains on it. We then get a bit closer and notice that it had 4 or 5 deer legs, and it appears as though it had been cut right through. This is on private land and pretty far from any neighbours, in a place where none of them would have a line of sight on it. In order for them to be hung there, somebody would have had to take a hike at least 500 or 600 yards in open fields without being detected at all. We called the police and a deputy sheriff stopped and took pictures and took a statement. He then said it was probably coyote hunters, and he didn't seem to be interested in the fact that none of them would have permission to be here. 20 years later, and we never found out who did this. You're just another link in the food chain, but that doesn't really come across your mind until you find a half-eaten deer carcass and realise that these things are absolutely huge. And the strangest thing, I thought that I'd seen a plane crash. As unusual as it is, I was working alone on a remote hillside and I saw a plane, like a full-size commercial plane, flying below the ridgeline between the mountains. I thought it was going to crash for sure, but it didn't. It just weaved through and kept going. I thought it was weird because it didn't have any logos on it or any writing at all. Come to think of it, we're near an Air Force base and they were training pilots to go to Afghanistan, but it's still really strange. I'm someone who had lived up in the mountains all my life. I actually had my own place and I absolutely loved to be here. I never really paid too much attention to folklore or anything like that because, well, I'd never seen anything, so why would I believe it? Living up in these mountains can be good and bad, but honestly, it's like your own planet here. You cannot see anybody at all, and I mean that unless you choose so, which is good, but it can be pretty dangerous at the same time too. I didn't have any immediate neighbours. I'd have to get in my truck and drive for quite a while to actually see them, which is fine, because I don't mind being on my own up here. I know there's some people that can drive insane, but for me, I liked it. Now, I'd lived in some beautiful forest area too, where that I didn't have to go too far to get away from people even further. I really wouldn't see anybody when I walked on these trails, not only because of the fact that it was winter, but it was cold, like really cold, so you always had to bring a really nice coat with you. Now, I'm not from North America like most of the people on here, so sorry if I get any of my English wrong, but I'd like to share my story of what happened one day. Now, it's something that I can't really put my finger on even now trying to think of it. It was about 2 years ago, and I've decided that finally I should share my story with everyone. So, it was one of those days that I needed to go on a hike just to get out of my house. And also, there had been reports of some people hanging around in the forest, and I wanted to investigate. Just out of plain curiosity reasons. There was no reason for me to go down there, I mean honestly, but I just wanted to have a look around and see what was occurring. So I head out. Now, as I head out, I have my warm clothes with me and my torches and everything, and even some supplies in a backpack, just in case I got hungry. When you walk in the snow like this, it's normal for you to feel quite tired and for your legs to feel kind of like a burn. It's something I got used to though, because I'd lived up here for so long and it didn't put me off my adventure. I wasn't actually expecting to find anyone, so I have no issues. Now it is very cold while I start walking, and when I first come out of my truck I'm actually hesitant about if I actually want to go or not, but I think if I'm a true mountain person then it shouldn't affect me, so I head off down the first path. Now on this first path there's a really nice road and there's pretty cool trees on either side of me. They're very skinny obviously because it being winter and they don't have any leaves, and it means you can actually see quite far. Not miles but decently, so you know if anybody else is out here. I decided that for today I wanted to wear some bright blue clothing because I want to stand out a bit from the background, and I don't know, if there was any possibility, as small as it might be, that I'd get lost, I wanted people to be able to recognise me easily amongst the background. Now, I didn't have to make it too far in before things got weird. I remembered pretty much immediately hearing some kind of screechy sound, and you know what I did? I laughed. Clearly someone out here was trying to play a game with me, or with each other. It almost sounded like the thing was on a tape recording, so I wasn't really bothered, and I continue on my walk. I think if anything comes, I am armed too, so I'm not afraid to take it out. So yeah, it's just me against the world pretty much, so I feel fairly confident. I continue on my walk down this trail, and the trees seem to get a bit taller now. They look absolutely beautiful like they always do, and I felt quite proud to actually live where I do. Not a lot of people get to experience things like this, and I feel like I was very grateful to God for being able to. I even get to see some lights in the sky sometimes because I'm so far away from people. You get a really good view of the stars and everything. I've even been able to see a number of shooting stars because of this, and again, it's something I liked. Now while walking, I come closer and closer to a big clearing up ahead, and this is the way that I want to walk. Now, I had a warm feeling while walking. I don't know why, I just felt like an inner peace. Now, I didn't get too much further down when I realised that the shrieking sounds have stopped. Yeah, it sounds really unreal. Not like anything that you'd worry about if you knew what it was, but still disturbing if you didn't. However, I wasn't worried at all. I just thought there were some idiots that got drunk out here and thought, oh yeah, let me play some games. Some of the local people here do things like that because, well, I don't know, they probably just get bored or something. I wasn't one of them, but I wasn't gonna let them take advantage of me, so I thought, well, what if I make them jump? Wouldn't that be funny? Now, it never crossed my mind that this might actually be a crazy person and that maybe I'll fight to the death, but hey, I guess you kind of get those thoughts in hindsight. So I continue down this path and eventually make it to a more structured area that actually has quite a nice little walkway and stairs that go down. Now, to be honest, I don't actually know how this thing stayed structurally sound. The wood it was built on was pretty good, but they never maintained it. I think that's one problem with places like this, is they only ever do some work in the summer, but it's never enough. If this thing had fell, I would have gone quite a long way down with it. I'm pretty sure some of the branches from the trees would have cut into the sides of me, and it wouldn't have been a good day if that had happened. But luckily it holds up my weight, and I needed to lose some, to be honest, so I was actually a little bit concerned about this happening. I eventually make it a bit further in, and I can hear a different sound now. This one's more like a moan than it is an actual squeak. Almost like something needs help, like a sympathy one. Now, you ain't gonna get no sympathy from me, is what I shouted out, still thinking there were these idiots out here trying to mess with me, and it wasn't gonna work. Now, there wasn't really any animals that I had to be worried about, so again, I felt fairly confident now. Now, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going miles away from people and getting myself lost out here. I was just following the trails that I knew so well and felt comfortable in. And every so often I'd pass a little tag on the trees that made me recognise that I was going the right way. I don't know how recently they put them up here, but I knew I was still on the trail. Now, the scenery was really lovely. There was about 5 or 6 inches of snow on either side of me. I could see it because on some of the wooden railings it kind of stood above the ground, and it just made me feel quite happy to be where I was. There weren't any footsteps, so I knew it was me alone here and it felt good. I'd even slide my way through pretending that I was skiing, but I realised it wasn't a great job to do that because my socks were going to suffer if water got in. Now, I actually had frostbite before on my toes and it wasn't a nice experience. I remembered when I was a kid that I made some little den thing and I just left my feet in there and kind of relaxed. I wasn't doing anything. Now, eventually part of it fell on my feet, but I couldn't be bothered to move. I couldn't really feel my toes, so I thought that was just because of the cold, but I didn't realise that part of my shoe had torn and snow was already on my feet. So when I got in, obviously I had some form of frostbite and my mother took me to the hospital quickly and they were able to sort me out. But it wasn't something I wanted to experience again. If you injure your feet in places out this, then you're kind of in real trouble, because yeah, you can go on, but you're going to sacrifice your feet and you can't really crawl, because it's going to be incredibly slow, and secondly, you're going to get really cold, so I was ever so cautious of it and kind of cut it out. Weirdly, the further I was going, the less confident I was feeling. Usually I'm somebody who doesn't really fear much of anything, but now I've got to tell you, for whatever reason that was fading. Let's say it started out at about 90% and had dropped down to probably 30 or 40, which is very low for my standards. Again, I'm not letting this put me off, and I kind of have my ego take over and I say, you know what, I'm just going to keep going. I call out, hey, I need to come and meet you and your friends. Let's play hide and seek as a joke. I hear what almost sounds like laughter, but more of an animalistic sound. And again, I don't know what these people are doing. There was definitely people in here with me. I could just sense their presence, but my confidence was going down now. I decided that it's probably best if I don't stay out here too late, because I don't actually know what's out here and I don't want to be stuck here in the dark with whatever they are. The other thing is, if I have to hide, it's going to be a pretty hard job with my coat on. I do have a couple of camouflage coats, which are more like hunters' ones, but in this particular moment I don't have that. I've just got my old blue one, and I'm going to stand out like there's no tomorrow, and I don't want to take off my coat to hide because obviously that would be stupid. I make it up to another one of the trail markers, and I start to feel more normal again. As I'm waiting here, I hear a sound much closer now. It sounds like branches snapping off the side of the trail that I'm on. Now what's weird about this is that it would be really difficult for a person to walk there, and God knows how heavy they would have to be to actually snap like that. I mean, I know if I run them through myself in it might make that sound, but not consistently, and that's the first thing that I think's a little odd. I noticed too that my vision's gone a little bit blurry now, and it takes a second, and I realise that something's walked past ahead of me. Now, I was convinced that my eyes were just watering for a second, but it wasn't. So someone wearing a white coat was up ahead, and I think, I've got you now. So I actually jog a bit. Weirdly, I can see movement now, but up on the opposite side, which is bizarre, so there must be two people, because there's no way anybody moved that quick up there. I would hear kind of like a deep breathing too every so often. It was like somebody was trying their best to stay still but just could not control their diaphragm, and that's why I was hearing things. Again, I think this is pretty odd, and I do have my weapon with me, so I'm not scared. But I decided that it's probably not such a good idea to be playing games with these kids, because finally, after God knows how long, I know it's probably too long, I start to feel quite anxious. I decide it's best if I head back now, and I begin to turn around. That's when I hear a scream sound again, but much closer. I look out, and I can just about make out some kind of eyes staring up at me, just from the ridgeline. This is weird. I can tell that they're wearing some kind of Halloween costume, and they kind of look like a monkey, but like more white coloured. They have these big jagged teeth, and I think, God, this is actually quite creepy now. At least they're warm in that thing. I actually started to make animal sounds back to them now. I know you're probably thinking this is stupid, and I bet it looked really weird from a distance. Yeah, so I did that. I thought it would make them move, and I start to charge towards them. I say something silly along the lines of, I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. I know this probably wouldn't have been good, because if it was anybody scared or lost, then it wouldn't hold up good in court, would it? I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. But I wasn't thinking like that at the time. My confidence was coming back to my head, and yeah, I should probably tell you that that fearlessness was immediately fading. As I get closer, this thing looks almost too real. It quickly darts off again, but not at the speed that a human couldn't match, so I don't think much of it. I just think, God, there's some right weirdos out here, and I decided that I should just head back more hastily now. Because of all my energy expenditure, I've actually become really hungry suddenly, and I just want to get back home now. It's not like I was getting home too much anyway, because I wasn't working at the time because of the season. I actually work as a logger, but I could tell you a few stories about that quickly before I go on. Being a logger, there's times of the year that we can't actually work because A, it's too dangerous and the conditions don't allow it. I guess one weird thing that had actually happened to us is that one of my friends was working one of the machines when suddenly he just stops and turns back to me and says, something's wrong here, I can feel it. Not 2 seconds later, one of the machines sets on fire, and there was actually a massive fire that eventually spread to the logs we had cut. We eventually made it out of here, and my friend starts crying, and I say, what's wrong? He says, I had a dream that we died here in this fire. Yeah, it's pretty weird. I don't know whether he was psychic or anything, or if maybe a spirit had come to warn him, but that was definitely weird. It kind of unsettled me quite a lot, to be honest, more than I want to admit. But yeah, like I was saying, I worked as a logger and not much was on, so going home would just basically be reading or something, and I didn't really want to. But anyway, with the current circumstances, boredom should be the least of my issues, so I just continue on my way. That's when I get the first instinct that something's definitely off now. I could hear that sound crashing through the trees next to me. I can't really see anything, but again it's through parts of the woods that are far too thick to be going through if you're a normal person not on the trail. And it almost felt like the ground shaked a little bit when this person was moving. Now I couldn't see them clearly, it was almost like a blur out of the side of my vision. I don't know what you guys call it, but you know when you can just see out of the side of your eye. So I decided to pick up a jog now. I think that I can probably outlast whatever this thing is running, and I've probably jogged for about 10 minutes straight. Now in those conditions that was actually a mammoth challenge, and I'm barely able to do so. I stopped to catch my breath and I realise there's movement again, and I hear a screech again. This one is much louder, and now I realise something is definitely off. There's no way any person could have run through the woods like that parallel to me at that pace for that long. I mean literally, there's no way that it should be possible. How on earth would they have got through the trees and all the twigs and other stuff laying around without making that much noise, but not on a path? I was barely able to do it myself, being quite a quick person and relatively athletic, but they did it next to me the whole time. And this clearly wasn't a person playing a game now. I feel a little bit better because where this thing is running is clearly off quite a big cliff, so now they have quite a challenge to get back up to where I am, so I feel a little bit more confident. However, something in the back of my mind is just telling me that this whole situation is off and that I really need to try and get out of here. So I decide that there's not much else I can do now, and just start walking back. I realise that where I'm walking's got a nice little path again, and I can follow this up. But I wasn't sure what thing was following me. That's when something's off. The bridge thing that I was standing on now kind of collapsed up ahead of me, and suddenly reality set in. For a second I lock eyes with God knows what this thing is, but this ape-type creature covered in white fur, kind of looking dusty almost, is staring at me with these horrible teeth grueling. It lets out the scream sound again, and I realise this is no person playing games with me. I suddenly feel very scared, and without thinking I quickly dart under a tree and try and fortify my position and quickly kick some snow up ahead of me. I'm kind of hidden now in the bushes, and I take a moment to try and calm my breath and be as still and quiet as possible. I kid you not, I saw what looks like what I can only describe as a yeti sprint past, stop for a moment and start to smell. I dared breathe and I probably held my breath for about 30 seconds straight. This thing then goes exactly to where I was standing before with crashing sounds. I let out a slow sigh of relief as I let the air leave my body again when I hear the screech even louder. I now hear other screeches similar, and I'm pretty sure there was more than one of this thing. I don't know what to do now because obviously I'm not going to stay very warm in my current position, but what on God's earth is that thing? I really don't know what that could possibly have been. It sounds exactly like the things that I've heard about in our folklore, but they're not real. This can't be real. I keep telling myself over and over again in my head that this cannot be real. This entire situation is simply impossible. And I wait. I waited for so long that I begin to really shiver heavily, and I have no sign of whatever that thing is. I realise now that I have to step out and start moving again just to stay warm. Now I'm not joking, the second my head leaves the clearing, I hear it scream again just further away now, and I hear some sounds advancing towards me. I start sprinting. I'm not that far from safety now, but I can hear that thing coming. That's the worst part of it. The whole time that I was running, I can hear this thing chasing me, and I can't see it, I don't even think about the weapon that I have, just something clicked in my head. Some kind of calculation took place to make me remember that there's no way I can fight off whatever this is. I jog and jog until eventually I make it back towards where my car is. I quickly fumble for the keys and drop them. I punch my car in anger and that sets off the car alarm. And then I glance behind myself and I see it again. Those teeth, but it was like the second it had heard that alarm, it scared it, and it turns and starts sprinting off out of sight. I quickly get my keys and unlock my car, jumping in it, and I drove out and immediately skid a bit and have to slam onto the brakes. I've gone off the side of the road, but I quickly slam it into reverse and get back on again. It's incredibly dangerous conditions to drive in, and I might die if I'm not careful, so I've managed to calm myself for a few seconds. I look around and all I can hear is some wind chill and the sounds of some snow falling off of a tree not too far away. Now I eventually compose myself enough to drive and eventually make it back home. I ended up writing down everything that happened. I'm old-fashioned, so I wrote it with pen and paper, but it was almost like a therapy for me. I have never been to that area again, and I actually moved in with my family afterwards for a couple of months. I never told them what had happened, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. I want to share my story with you all because I don't know what happened those years ago. It just seems odd and something that I can't describe, and that really scares me. I'm someone who had lived up in the mountains all my life. I actually had my own place and I absolutely loved to be here. I never really paid too much attention to folklore or anything like that because, well, I'd never seen anything, so why would I believe it? Living up in these mountains can be good and bad, but honestly, it's like your own planet here. You cannot see anybody at all, and I mean that unless you choose so. Which is good, but it can be pretty dangerous at the same time too. I didn't have any immediate neighbours. I'd have to get in my truck and drive for quite a while to actually see them, which is fine, because I don't mind being on my own up here. I know there's some people that can drive insane, but for me, I liked it. Now, I'd lived in some beautiful forest area too, where I didn't have to go too far to get away from people even further. I really wouldn't see anybody when I walked on these trails, not only because of the fact that it was winter, but it was cold, like really cold, so you always had to bring a really nice coat with you. Now, I'm not from North America like most of the people on here, so sorry if I get any of my English wrong, but I'd like to share my story of what happened one day. Now, it's something that I can't really put my finger on even now trying to think of it. It was about 2 years ago and I've decided that finally I should share my story with everyone. So, it was one of those days that I needed to go on a hike just to get out of my house. And also, there had been reports of some people hanging around in the forest and I wanted to investigate. Just out of plain curiosity reasons. There was no reason for me to go down there, I mean honestly, but I just wanted to have a look around and see what was occurring. So I head out. Now, as I head out, I have my warm clothes with me and my torches and everything, and even some supplies in a backpack, just in case I got hungry. When you walk in the snow like this, it's normal for you to feel quite tired and for your legs to feel kind of like a burn. It's something I got used to though because I'd lived up here for so long and it didn't put me off my adventure. I wasn't actually expecting to find anyone, so I have no issues. Now it is very cold while I start walking, And when I first come out of my truck, I'm actually hesitant about if I actually want to go or not, but I think if I'm a true mountain person, then it shouldn't affect me. So I head off down the first path. Now on this first path, there's a really nice road, and there's pretty cool trees on either side of me. They're very skinny, obviously, because it being winter and they don't have any leaves, and it means you can actually see quite far. Not miles, but decently, so you know if anybody else is out here. I decided that for today I wanted to wear some bright blue clothing, because I want to stand out a bit from the background, and I don't know, if there was any possibility, as small as it might be, that I'd get lost, I wanted people to be able to recognise me easily amongst the background. Now, I didn't have to make it too far in before things got weird. I remembered pretty much immediately hearing some kind of screechy sound, and you know what I did? I laughed. Clearly someone out here was trying to play a game with me, or with each other. It almost sounded like the thing was on a tape recording, so I wasn't really bothered, and I continue on my walk. I think if anything comes, I am armed too, so I'm not afraid to take it out. So yeah, it's just me against the world pretty much, so I feel fairly confident. I continue on my walk down this trail, and the trees seem to get a bit taller now. They look absolutely beautiful like they always do, and I felt quite proud to actually live where I do. Not a lot of people get to experience things like this, and I feel like I was very grateful to God for being able to. I even get to see some lights in the sky sometimes because I'm so far away from people. You get a really good view of the stars and everything. I've even been able to see a number of shooting stars because of this, and again, it's something I liked. Now while walking, I come closer and closer to a big clearing up ahead, and this is the way that I want to walk. Now, I had a warm feeling while walking. I don't know why, I just felt like an inner peace. Now, I didn't get too much further down when I realised that the shrieking sounds have stopped. Yeah, it sounds really unreal. Not like anything that you'd worry about if you knew what it was, but still disturbing if you didn't. However, I wasn't worried at all. I just thought there were some idiots that got drunk out here and thought, oh yeah, let me play some games. Some of the local people here do things like that because, well, I don't know, they probably just get bored or something. I wasn't one of them, but I wasn't gonna let them take advantage of me, so I thought, well, what if I make them jump? Wouldn't that be funny? Now, it never crossed my mind that this might actually be a crazy person and that maybe I'll fight to the death, but hey, I guess you kind of get those thoughts in hindsight. So I continue down this path and eventually make it to a more structured area that actually has quite a nice little walkway and stairs that go down. Now, to be honest, I don't actually know how this thing stayed structurally sound. The wood it was built on was pretty good, but they never maintained it. I think that's one problem with places like this, is they only ever do some work in the summer, but it's never enough. If this thing had fell, I would have gone quite a long way down with it. I'm pretty sure some of the branches from the trees would have cut into the sides of me, and it wouldn't have been a good day if that had happened. But luckily it holds up my weight, and I needed to lose some, to be honest, so I was actually a little bit concerned about this happening. I eventually make it a bit further in, and I can hear a different sound now. This one's more like a moan than it is an actual skreak. Almost like something needs help, like a sympathy one. Now, you ain't gonna get no sympathy from me, is what I shouted out, still thinking there were these idiots out here trying to mess with me, and it wasn't gonna work. Now, there wasn't really any animals that I had to be worried about, so again, I felt fairly confident now. Now, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going miles away from people and getting myself lost out here. I was just following the trails that I knew so well and felt comfortable in. And every so often I'd pass a little tag on the trees that made me recognise that I was going the right way. I don't know how recently they put them up here, but I knew I was still on the trail. Now, the scenery was really lovely. There was about 5 or 6 inches of snow on either side of me, I could see it because on some of the wooden railings it kind of stood above the ground, and it just made me feel quite happy to be where I was. There weren't any footsteps, so I knew it was me alone here and it felt good. I'd even slide my way through pretending that I was skiing, but I realised it wasn't a great job to do that because my socks were going to suffer if water got in. Now I actually had frostbite before on my toes and it wasn't a nice experience. I remembered when I was a kid that I made some little den thing and I just left my feet in there and kind of relaxed. I wasn't doing anything. Now, eventually part of it fell on my feet, but I couldn't be bothered to move. I couldn't really feel my toes, so I thought that was just because of the cold, but I didn't realise that part of my shoe had torn and snow was already on my feet. So when I got in, obviously I had some form of frostbite and my mother took me to the hospital quickly and they were able to sort me out. But it wasn't something I wanted to experience again. If you injure your feet in places out this, then you're kind of in real trouble, because yeah, you can go on, but you're going to sacrifice your feet and you can't really crawl, because it's going to be incredibly slow, and secondly, you're going to get really cold, so I was ever so cautious of it and kind of cut it out. Weirdly, the further I was going, the less confident I was feeling. Usually I'm somebody who doesn't really fear much of anything, but now I've got to tell you, for whatever reason that was fading. Let's say it started out at about 90% and had dropped down to probably 30 or 40, which is very low for my standards. Again, I'm not letting this put me off, and I kind of have my ego take over and I say, you know what, I'm just going to keep going. I call out, hey, I need to come and meet you and your friends. Let's play hide and seek as a joke. I hear what almost sounds like laughter, but more of an animalistic sound. And again, I don't know what these people are doing. There was definitely people in here with me. I could just sense their presence, but my confidence was going down now. I decided that it's probably best if I don't stay out here too late, because I don't actually know what's out here and I don't want to be stuck here in the dark with whatever they are. The other thing is, if I have to hide, it's going to be a pretty hard job with my coat on. I do have a couple of camouflage coats, which are more like hunters' ones, but in this particular moment I don't have that. I've just got my old blue one, and I'm going to stand out like there's no tomorrow, and I don't want to take off my coat to hide, because obviously that would be stupid. I make it up to another one of the trail markers, and I start to feel more normal again. As I'm waiting here, I hear a sound much closer now. It sounds like branches snapping off the side of the trail that I'm on. Now what's weird about this is that it would be really difficult for a person to walk there, and God knows how heavy they would have to be to actually snap like that. I mean, I know if I run and threw myself in it might make that sound, but not consistently, and that's the first thing that I think's a little odd. I noticed too that my vision's gone a little bit blurry now, and it takes a second and I realise that something's walked past ahead of me. Now I was convinced that my eyes were just watering for a second, but it wasn't. So someone wearing a white coat was up ahead and I think, I've got you now. So I actually jog a bit. Weirdly, I can see movement now, but up on the opposite side, which is bizarre, so there must be two people, because there's no way anybody moved that quick up there. I would hear kind of like a deep breathing too every so often. It was like somebody was trying their best to stay still but just could not control their diaphragm, and that's why I was hearing things. Again, I think this is pretty odd, and I do have my weapon with me, so I'm not scared. But I decided that it's probably not such a good idea to be playing games with these kids, because finally, after God knows how long, I know it's probably too long, I start to feel quite anxious. I decide it's best if I head back now, and I begin to turn around. That's when I hear a scream sound again, but much closer. I look out and I can just about make out some kind of eyes staring up at me, just from the ridgeline. This is weird. I can tell that they're wearing some kind of Halloween costume, and they kind of look like a monkey but like more white coloured. They have these big jagged teeth, and I think, God, this is actually quite creepy now. At least they're warm in that thing. I actually started to make animal sounds back to them now. I know you're probably thinking this is stupid, and I bet it looked really weird from a distance. Yeah, so I did that. I thought it would make them move, and I start to charge towards them. I say something silly along the lines of, I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. I know this probably wouldn't have been good, because if it was anybody scared or lost, then it wouldn't hold up good in court, would it? I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. But I wasn't thinking like that at the time. My confidence was coming back to my head, and yeah, I should probably tell you that fearlessness was immediately fading. As I get closer, this thing looks almost too real. It quickly darts off again, but not at the speed that a human couldn't match, so I don't think much of it. I just think, God, there's some right weirdos out here, and I decide that I should just head back more hastily now. Because of all my energy expenditure, I've actually become really hungry suddenly, and I just want to get back home now. It's not like I was getting home too much anyway, because I wasn't working at the time because of the season. I actually work as a logger, but I could tell you a few stories about that quickly before I go on. Being a logger, there's times of the year that we can't actually work because A, it's too dangerous and the conditions don't allow it. I guess one weird thing that had actually happened to us is that one of my friends was working one of the machines when suddenly he just stops and turns back to me and says, something's wrong here, I can feel it. Not 2 seconds later, one of the machines sets on fire, and there was actually a massive fire that eventually spread to the logs we had cut. We eventually made it out of here, and my friend starts crying, and I say, what's wrong? He says, I had a dream that we died here in this fire. Yeah, it's pretty weird. I don't know whether he was psychic or anything, or if maybe a spirit had come to warn him, but that was definitely weird. It kind of unsettled me quite a lot, to be honest, more than I want to admit. But yeah, like I was saying, I worked as a logger and not much was on, so going home would just basically be reading or something, and I didn't really want to. But anyway, with the current circumstances, boredom should be the least of my issues, so I just continue on my way. That's when I get the first instinct that something's definitely off now. I could hear that sound crashing through the trees next to me. I can't really see anything, but again, it's through parts of the woods that are far too thick to be going through if you're a normal person not on the trail. And it almost felt like the ground shaked a little bit when this person was moving. Now, I couldn't see them clearly, it was almost like a blur out of the side of my vision. I don't know what you guys call it, but you know when you can just see out of the side of your eye. So I decided to pick up a jog now. I think that I can probably outlast whatever this thing is running, and I've probably jogged for about 10 minutes straight. Now, in those conditions, that was actually a mammoth challenge, and I'm barely able to do so. I stop to catch my breath, and I realise there's movement again, and I hear a screech again. This one is much louder, and now I realise something is definitely off. There's no way any person could have run through the woods like that parallel to me at that pace for that long. I mean, literally, there's no way that it should be possible. How on earth would they have got through the trees and all the twigs and other stuff laying around without making that much noise, but not on a path? I was barely able to do it myself, being quite a quick person and relatively athletic, but they did it next to me the whole time. And this clearly wasn't a person playing a game now. I feel a little bit better because where this thing is running is clearly off quite a big cliff, so now they have quite a challenge to get back up to where I am, so I feel a little bit more confident. However, something in the back of my mind is just telling me that this whole situation is off and that I really need to try and get out of here. So I decide that there's not much else I can do now, and just start walking back. I realise that where I'm walking's got a nice little path again, and I can follow this up. But I wasn't sure what thing was following me. That's when something's off. The bridge thing that I was standing on now kind of collapsed up ahead of me, and suddenly reality set in. For a second I lock eyes with God knows what this thing is, but this ape-type creature covered in white fur, kind of looking dusty almost, is staring at me with these horrible teeth grueling. It lets out the scream sound again, and I realise this is no person playing games with me. I suddenly feel very scared, and without thinking I quickly dart under a tree and try and fortify my position and quickly kick some snow up ahead of me. I'm kind of hidden now in the bushes, and I take a moment to try and calm my breath and be as still and quiet as possible. I kid you not, I saw what looks like what I can only describe as a yeti sprint past, stop for a moment and start to smell. I dared breathe, and I probably held my breath for about 30 seconds straight. This thing then goes exactly to where I was standing before with crashing sounds. I let out a slow sigh of relief as I let the air leave my body again when I hear the screech even louder. I now hear other screeches similar, and I'm pretty sure there was more than one of this thing. I don't know what to do now because obviously I'm not going to stay very warm in my current position, but what on God's earth is that thing? I really don't know what that could possibly have been. It sounds exactly like the things that I've heard about in our folklore, but they're not real. This can't be real. I keep telling myself over and over again in my head that this cannot be real. This entire situation is simply impossible. And I wait. I waited for so long that I begin to really shiver heavily, and I have no sign of whatever that thing is. I realise now that I have to step out and start moving again just to stay warm. Now I'm not joking, the second my head leaves the clearing, I hear it scream again just further away now, and I hear some sounds advancing towards me. I start sprinting. I'm not that far from safety now, but I can hear that thing coming. That's the worst part of it. The whole time that I was running, I can hear this thing chasing me, and I can't see it. I don't even think about the weapon that I have, just something clicked in my head. Some kind of calculation took place to make me remember that there's no way I can fight off whatever this is. I jog and jog until eventually I make it back towards where my car is. I quickly fumble for the keys and drop them. I punch my car in anger, and that sets off the car alarm, and then I glance behind myself and I see it again. Those teeth, but it was like the second it had heard that alarm, it scared it, and it turns and starts sprinting off out of sight. I quickly get my keys and unlock my car, jumping in it, and I drove out and immediately skid a bit and have to slam onto the brakes. I've gone off the side of the road, but I quickly slam it into reverse and get back on again. It's incredibly dangerous conditions to drive in, and I might die if I'm not careful, so I've managed to calm myself for a few seconds. I look around and all I can hear is some wind chill, and the sounds of some snow falling off of a tree not too far away. Now I eventually compose myself enough to drive, and eventually make it back home. I ended up writing down everything that happened. I'm old-fashioned, so I wrote it with pen and paper, but it was almost like a therapy for me. I have never been to that area again, and I actually moved in with my family afterwards for a couple of months. I never told them what had happened, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. I want to share my story with you all because I don't know what happened those years ago. It just seems odd and something that I can't describe, and that really scares me. I started my night shift like all of the others. Just a couple of customers and not really much happening. We had a couple regulars in, and that made it feel more refreshing than normal. Now, the particular gas station that I work in was far away from people. There weren't any other buildings around, so it was basically just you there on your own. I didn't mind so much. I actually think this kind of added to the atmosphere a bit and made you concentrate more. It gets closer and closer to the witcher hours, and it comes up to about 2 AM. Now just as this happens, I can see the silhouette of somebody in the distance. I don't take much notice of it, and they aren't coming to the gas station, so it doesn't bother me. They eventually fade out of sight and I forget things. I check over the cash register and do some cash checks. Now, it's important to remember that when doing the cash checks you lock the door, so I done so. I almost forgot and actually kicked myself for not doing so. If one of the managers had come, then I would be in some real trouble. So I go back to counting when something catches my attention. It's just out of the corner of my eye, but unmistakable. There was someone not far away that seems to just pass by the side of our building. Now adjacent to it there was nothing, so I knew nobody should be there. I go back to my work again when suddenly I hear a knock. I can hear that this knock is coming from the back, where that nobody goes. There's only miles of forest there, so why would anybody be standing there? I think this is really bizarre, and I go back to my counting. While counting, I first hear it. A scream. I can't make out exactly what it is at first, but it sounds like somebody screaming for help. I can just hear the faint help. Help me, help. I get chills down my spine when I notice this, and I slowly go up to the window. That's when I see it. Or should I say them, because I don't really know who or what this is, but all I can see in front of me is a silhouette of a person. I can't see their face because that's covered, and I go to ask if they're the one asking for help when, terrified, I see them raise a knife which glistens off of the moonlight. I then take a step back in horror and sprint back towards the till. They then make their way to the front entrance and start tapping with the knife on the window. Tap, 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 I hear, as I can hear some maniacal laughing outside. I then hear them trying to open the door, but struggling because of the lock. I then scream that I'm gonna call the police, and I quickly and very obviously grab the phone and dial 911. This person doesn't go immediately and keeps trying the lock before punching the door, actually breaking some of the glass. I'm too scared to look and give the dispatchers my location, and they say they're gonna send some squad out. I look up and the person is gone. I can only notice that they've took off running into the woods, but I don't know what direction they've gone in. It's not much later that the police arrive. They quickly come and help me, and they ask for a description of the person. The station that I work at is quite old, so we don't have any cameras. Just me describing what happened exactly as it did. The police take my statements and say leave it with us, but they never found exactly who that was, and that still haunts me to this day. Now I work in an abandoned facility. I work the night shift here as security. Now, most of my nights have been completely uneventful, and for that I'm very grateful. However, there was one particular night that sticks out in my mind. Now let me take you there. It was about 12 o'clock at the time of this, and I just got the handover from the other security working there. We got on really well, and we were just talking about sports initially. Eventually my friend has to go, and so does my added security, so we say our goodbyes, and I start doing my rounds. Now I have a flashlight, and it's my job to explore the buildings to make sure that nobody's there. You know, just during the security sweeps. Now this wasn't a problem, and it's something that I'd learnt to do very quickly, and sometimes I might even say that I enjoy it, but on this particular night something just felt different. So I enter into the first building, which is actually the biggest abandoned one, which is an asylum. There's not much here. I managed to do my sweeps on the first floor, and I don't find anything. I do notice rather strangely that when I make my way up the stairs onto the second floor, I feel really cold. It's weird how chilly it gets all of a sudden, and I don't know what's caused this. I make my way up the stairs and it honestly feels like I'm in Antarctica or somewhere like that. Just as I make my way there, I can kind of make out the shadow of something moving up the stairs. Now, I take a moment to stay still to see if it was actually me moving or not, but then I realise it wasn't. And my torch reveals that somebody's just moved upstairs, or at least I think that's what's happened. I think it's probably just an animal and don't think much of it, and I start doing my sweeps. I can hear the crunching on my shoes of some of the debris from the dilapidated building on my shoes as I make my way into the first area. And then I hear it, scurrying and footsteps above me. Now I know that nobody should be in this building but me, and there's somebody else in this building, so I have to go up. Now I make a decision that is truly out of fight or flight, and for some reason I decide to fight suddenly. I become overwhelmed with rage and I start chasing upstairs, charging like a bull. That's when I catch someone. There's someone dressed in some dated night clothes running the opposite direction. They have a hat on, which is something that I thought was bizarre. Not like a baseball cap, but this was more of a top hat, and I come after them. I scream out, hey, what are you doing? Stop. And I give chase. I can see that they've gone through one room, slammed the door behind them, and I can hear them going up the stairs. Not to worry. I know the building like the back of my hand, and I turn round on my heels, and in no time I'm up onto that floor. Now I follow this person as they crash up ahead, and I get very close to them. They don't seem to be making much noise as they're running, but I can still hear where they're going, and I follow the footsteps as far as I can, until eventually I see them go up to the top. I think, hey, I've got you now, and I decide to run up the stairs, and I burst through the door. And now I've got that cold feeling again, like the atmosphere's different, and that's when I realise it. My torch is illuminating the entire room and I can't see another person. That means that somebody up here has either gone through a window, or where could they have gone? I quickly check the windows and they're all boarded up. It instantly hits me how wrong the situation is, and before I know it, I'm sprinting in the other direction back down the stairs and out of the building. I scream on the radio that I need backup and somebody's gone MIA. I wait for a while and one of the other security guards shows up. We ended up searching the entire building and can never find signs of anyone. It was literally like somebody ran for a long time until they just disappeared. Now I work the night shift, and I do it in a country where you get lots and lots of people that are very poor and are basically desperate to have anything. So it's completely common for me to run into people trying to steal copper cables or basically anything that they can get their hands on. Now I never have too much of an issue when this happens, and I just tell them just to get out of there. I don't always end up calling the cops because I understand that they might just need food. The areas that I have to cover also include an old abandoned hospital. Now I'm not gonna lie, anytime that I've been into the morgue I have a really weird feeling about it. It's almost like the whole atmosphere is just different there, and I'm sure that I've heard voices in the corners, but that's a story for another day. Now on this one particular shift, I had to cover the morgue and I was not happy about it. I don't know, I suppose you're paranoid enough in the daytime, but imagine being there on your own at night. I was convinced that spirits still haunted there. So I make my way to the morgue and I put my things down and I start drinking some water, and that's when I hear it. My hands sweat so much that I actually drop my bottle, and suddenly there's silence. I don't know whether I was scaring myself and I say, "Come on, snap out of it, man," when suddenly I can hear people speaking. Now they're speaking in Portuguese, which is my native language, and I realise that they're coming from some other area in the hospital. I decide that the best thing that I can do now is alert them of my presence, because they already know that someone's out here, and they better know it's the security. Now I actually lied and said, hey, I'm a cop, don't move, because I knew that would probably scare most people, and I start to advance towards where I can hear the voices. Now I can hear people run off, but it sounds like they dropped something in the process. They eventually scurry off, and I don't know where they go. It seems like they've dropped a torch or something, or left something behind, so I head over to the area. Now they're in the old X-ray unit, and I don't really like going in there because there's lots of old equipment still left. Through the door I can see something glowing. I then realise that it's either a light on the floor or something different. I shine my torch there for a few seconds, and as I move it away it seems to shine brighter, and that's when it hits me. They've left some kind of material that was supposed to be inside one of the X-ray machines, and it's literally glowing from my torch. I immediately sprint around and sprint as far away as I possibly can. I quickly call the law enforcement in, and they arrive on the site not long after. While they're dealing with it, I help the police in the search for the other people, but they're long gone. The only thing that they could find was a trail of glowing embers that slowly led into the forest, then a main road, that were clearly from the X-ray machine. I don't know too much about science and those kinds of things, but from what I heard, apparently it was a very dangerous material that they were trying to take for God knows what reason, and probably didn't realise how dangerous it was. I'm just lucky that I saw that first and didn't end up treading in it, or God forbid, trying to touch it. Now, doing nighttime jogs was one of my favourite things. It was really nice to be out by the streetlights, and I never dared really to go towards a real forest because I kind of thought they were quite creepy. Once or twice I actually got caught out in the forest and it did scare me a bit. I remembered one time that most of my friends had actually gone away and I was basically on my own. So I decided that I should probably do some exercise just to keep my mind happy. Now my brother had actually went on holiday too, and I kind of regretted not going. The thing was, I went away with these guys before and I really come to not enjoy it much, and I just thought it would be a waste of money to do so again. A lot of people were telling me to go, but I just couldn't justify the money and time, and heck, it was only going to be about 1 week. Now, I wasn't actually working at this time, so I was probably especially bored, and like I said, most of my friends had all went away on this one trip, so there wasn't much I could do. And I lived at home with my mum and dad at the time, so I'd actually be quite bored and not really have anything to do whatsoever. It kinda sucked where they lived because it wasn't close to a gym or much of anything, and I don't know, I just thought that was really boring for me. So yeah, I was doing one of my regular jogs and I decided to go through the forest on this one particular day. I didn't really check the time and I'd actually originally decided to walk, so I didn't expect to be jogging. But for whatever reason that bug kicked off on me and I go off into the woods. Now I spent too long on my phone and the next thing I knew, it was already dark, like really dark. So I was out there trying to find my way back when suddenly I hear the sound of a dog. Now this thing is barking really loud, like it kind of makes me jump every time that I hear it like that, and it doesn't let up. It goes on for about a good 10 minutes before I realise that it's getting closer, and this thing sounds menacing, and there's no owner chasing it by the way, so I'm pretty convinced that I need to get out of here. I quickly jump up on the bench and there's an old structure there, and I hear the barking get closer and closer, and then I can see it. Now, I don't know for certain if this is a wolf or not, but my god does it look like one. It looks much bigger than normal dogs, and within a second I'm on top of this structure. And this thing is honestly like a bat out of hell, but coming straight for me. It jumps up so high that it almost reaches over to get me, and it falls back down again, and I start screaming for help. I scream a few times and I'm met with only the sounds of the trees moving from the wind, and I realise I'm on my own. And this dog does not give up, or wolf, whatever it is. It's literally trying to climb on top to get me. I go to kick its head when it comes up, but I realise it might bite my foot and drag me down with it, so I decide not to. I don't have any idea how to train myself or what I can possibly do if it comes, so I just get ready to fight basically. Now this freaking thing does not let up for a good 40 minutes. What's worse is my phone that wasn't very good at the time had completely run out of charge, so it's just me, myself and I up here trying to get away from this thing. The other thing too is I was quite cold because I wasn't moving much, so I was worried about getting too cold and being in another kind of danger or getting pneumonia. I don't really know how it works, but you can read between the lines of what I was scared of. Eventually I hear a very loud crash of lightning and it disappears. I'm too scared to actually look over the edge of this building because I'm certain that it's going to be there again, but it's completely gone. Now annoyingly for me, there's an inside part and this animal could have easily ran and hid inside it and I wouldn't have known. So now I'm stuck with a dilemma. I can stay where I am or try and make my way out of there, but I know realistically this thing could run and get me. I decide that I don't have much of a choice now, so I decide to dangle down my headphone cable and actually drop my headphones in case it runs out. But nothing happened. I then have a more ingenious idea and wait for the next flash of lightning, which is actually scarily close to me, to illuminate the surroundings just enough, and I can see that this thing is gone. Now that's what doesn't make sense to me. Within a second, no actually less than a second, this animal completely disappears. So yeah, it was pretty weird that this had happened. I'm very scared and convinced myself that this is the end, and I'm just prepared to go up trees, and while I'm walking back to civilization, I'm always looking for the closest one I can get to. Eventually I make it back to safety, and I ended up jogging home because I was cold. I didn't really tell my parents about what had happened, but I was a little bit concerned about that thing I'd seen. It honestly looked like a wolf, but somehow different. I don't know if it was a new species or what, but I know for a fact that they're not native to the land that I live on, so there 100% shouldn't have been one there, and that creeped me out. Now interestingly, that's not the only scary thing that happened to me when I'd been out in the woods on my own doing some exercise. I remembered that another time I was walking in an area that I thought I knew pretty well when I noticed the path ahead's blocked. There's an old burnt out car which is completely blocking my way, and it's quite weird because it almost looks like the car's just been burnt a few seconds ago, but if you get close to it, it doesn't feel warm at all, and there's no people, no fire engine, and not enough of the ground is burnt to be honest. The ground should be burnt completely over, but it really doesn't look like it, and I think this is really odd. Not to worry too much though, I have a plan B. I can go all the way around, and that's what I try and do. Now I make it a little bit further up ahead, and I realise that there's a gate which I should be able to scale over and make my way back to a main road. Now I have to be careful here because the gate is a pretty big one, and I don't want to get my legs stuck and probably bleed, because that could be just as dangerous. Or obviously I could hit my head, but you get the point. Now I come up to another area that I'm familiar with, and it's just open land. That's when I realise something moving up ahead. I stay completely still for a few seconds and try and figure out what it is, and I can see that there's a person walking. Not just one, there's multiple. There's 5, then 6, then 7 people all walking in a single file line. They're wearing some kind of overalls, but they're carrying something and I can't make out what it is. Now I can't be certain, but there's a very large box which they're carrying on their heads. And weirdly when they're walking they don't seem to make a sound whatsoever. And this is something that really creeps me out. I actually don't have a clue how they move so silently in this kind of situation, but they did. Whatever they're carrying seems to be really heavy, but they're not making any signs of struggling. Now they walk off into the trees literally and disappear. The thing I didn't get is the way they walked is literally straight into some really dense, like, I don't know what you call it, but like plants and things. But they should have made noise and they shouldn't have been able to walk so directly into it. But guess what? They did. And that still freaks me out to this day. So yeah, as you can imagine, for about 5 or 6 years I didn't actually go into the woods whatsoever. Not really for anything, I just didn't see the point because I actually got bored of it all. I know it looks beautiful and great, but after a while it can become quite the same. But for some reason I started to get that bug in me again to go back out into the forest and just jog. And what do you know, I ended up doing it quite regular, which is back to the start of my story. It was one of those days and I decided that I was going to go further into the forest. Now, this was actually during a summer's day, so everything was really warm and dry, which was great. You did have a number of different insects and bugs that you had to be careful for, but that wasn't too much of an issue. I made my way into quite a nice open area, and I jogged for about a good 10 minutes before stopping. I actually should have brought some kind of longer bottoms, but I didn't, so my legs were getting cut up pretty nastily while I was jogging. So I took a while to sit down and just relax and listen to some music, and I had a grand old time. That's when I could smell smoke. Now it took me a few seconds because initially I thought it was a barbecue, like don't ask me why, but this is exactly what I thought. And suddenly I realised that it feels too warm where I am, and honestly, for a second I thought I might have passed away or something. It was that weird. Everything has this glow to it, and I realised that there's a fire, and a big one. Not only that, some of the houses near me have actually caught fire. I look around to see how far the fire goes, and then I realise it doesn't stop. Literally all around me is fire, and there doesn't seem to be anywhere I can go. I start panicking now as I look over. All I can see is a very tall wall which protects something. I don't know what it is, it's like trains or whatever, but it's impossible for me to climb it, literally. Even if you're the best in the world at parkour or climbing, there's no way that I'm going to get over it. Now, the fire actually begins spreading, and it's kind of coming parallel to me. It means it's not going directly to where I am, but I can see any opportunity for escape getting narrower and narrower, and I decide to assess the situation. I quickly take the deepest breath that I can, and I jog towards it. I didn't realise how quickly I'd get out of breath doing so, but I now quickly scan my surroundings. I certainly can't jump through this, and I can't hear any fire engines or anything, so I know I'm in big trouble. There is a kind of canal thing that runs off. I don't know whether it's a stream actually, but I know that that's dangerous too because the water runs very quick through here. And I realise that if the fire does spread on either side, I'm going to drown trying to escape. And then I have to catch my breath again, so I sprint back in the exact direction that I've just come from. I now start to scream and swear, calling out for help as quickly as I can. I managed to call through to the fire department, and they say that they're aware of the situation just to stay where I am and that help's coming. They tell me don't move whatever I do, but I say no, I'm gonna move. And I say I'm gonna turn off my phone now because I need to save the battery, so I do so and don't listen to their reply. Within those couple of seconds that I made the call, the fire actually starts spreading at a much quicker pace now, and it starts to engulf me, and I realise that I have no other options of what to do. I start to get as much air into my lungs as possible and try and breathe out all of the carbon dioxide that might be in my system. I take one last breath and I dive into the water. Immediately I hit my head and I start bleeding because I've gone into some rocks, because the water's actually less deep than I think, and I'm really struggling to stay afloat. I lose my phone immediately upon impact and I start drifting backwards. Now, I didn't realise too, but again the fire had spread even closer and was actually spreading to the wall. The wall was made out of some kind of wood and it wasn't fire resistant whatsoever. I now realise that there's a small clearing where this goes under the wall, but I don't know what's on the other side because I can see smoke coming from here. I decide that I don't have much of an option and I quickly take my last breath. I close my eyes and I just try and be as peaceful as I can, because if I don't make it, it's not going to make much use panicking now. And within a second, I'm ejected on the other side and there's no fire. It takes me a while to figure out where I am because I've actually never seen this, but there's some really old rail tracks here. I quickly surface again and I go to find my phone, but it's long gone. I can't stay for too long because the fire is also spreading on the wall and I can see it at the very top. I eventually beeline it towards where I think civilization should be and thankfully make it to a road in safety. I never recovered my phone and luckily nobody got hurt in the fire, but my god, I still have nightmares about this thing. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat remembering the situation that I was in. During the summer of 2008, it was a rough time to graduate from college. I just spent 4 years getting a degree, only to find that the job market had all but dried up. As bummed out as I was about being unemployed for the foreseeable future, I found a deep appreciation for backcountry camping and hiking that summer. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains and graduating from a college in western Montana, I was not a stranger to hiking or camping, but that summer it had become an escape to the point of obsession. Now, going on daily hikes and camping beneath the stars really helps my mental health while I was worried about my life purpose and future. It was June and unseasonably cold and wet. It was even cloudy. The daylight highs barely touched 50 degrees, and at night it could easily go way below freezing. But despite the weather, I had planned to hike around the Anaconda Range that week, and I wasn't going to let that deter me. My plan for the week, funnily enough, was to hike from Storm Lake, over Storm Lake Pass, and down to Upper Seymour Lake. Storm Lake is a challenge to get to and actually requires a 4x4 pickup and some skilled driving. The road is narrowed and a 2-track winding one, pushing its way through thick pine forests. The way was slick with rain, but I made it to the top with a little heartburn. I set up camp on the north shore of the lake and decided to do some fishing. The fishing was miserable. It was cold and nothing was biting, but the best thing about bad fishing is that my thoughts were free to wander while I sat on the shore. The rain was a constant light drizzle and created a natural white noise. Time passed and my daydreams were cut short as a low rumble comes up from a canoe, overtaking the sounds of rain. The rumbling was not like a distant diesel engine. Now that was a little bit odd. There were no roads that go beyond where I was camped. No machinery or vehicles could be up on the canyon. Maybe it's a plane, I thought, looking up into the rain clouds, but the sound wasn't getting closer or further away, and the sound wasn't actually above me. It came from beyond the lake and up into a canyon. The sound was stationary and constant. This was most certainly not a plane, or a truck or bulldozer. All of this wasn't outright scary, but nonetheless made my hair stand on its ends when I sat there listening. After 20 minutes, the rumbling faded away, and I was again left with only the sounds of rain. Soon enough, I caught a decent-sized trout and cleaned it and headed back to camp to get ready for dinner. The fish cooked up fine, but to be honest, I hate trout. It's edible, sure, but totally unappetizing. They taste like mud. I ate as much as I could stand and tossed the rest into the lake. I'm now building up my fire for the night. I sat back to enjoy the evening bit of whiskey. Night comes fast. The mountain ridge put the sun to bed early, and the rain clouds had actually obscured the starlight. It was dark, really dark. There was the sounds of crackling warm fire and rain bouncing off my tent, which were a great comfort and reason for me to lure into sleep. I remind myself that I needed to build up the fire before bed. I walk over to my pile of scavenged firewood and grabbed an armful. Being away from the fire cracking, I could pick up on that all too familiar rumbling sound which rises and falls in the background. It was growing louder and louder, and closer. I may have had a few many pulls of whiskey, but the noise was definitely ringing up to my camp. I yelled out, "Hey, shut up." Like a switch being flipped, the rumbling sound stopped, and so did the rain, and my heart skips a beat. I realized that isn't actually a coincidence. There was almost an intelligence, something sentient, observing me and responding to my screams, and I wasn't getting the most positive vibes from it. I threw all the logs onto the fire and retreated back to my tent, more on edge than I've ever been before, listening to the fire crackling, to my rapid breathing, and beyond that to the silence of darkness. Before that moment, I had never felt alone and dangerous at the same time. Now I feel vulnerable and alone. Beyond where the firelight faded, I felt that there's actually a million eyes watching me. My paranoia began to subside when suddenly the rain starts again. Not a drizzle, but actually a downpour. I was honestly shocked by this and really glad that I built up the fire, or it would have been snuffed out for sure. My tent was being pushed down by the force of the storm. I thought about bailing to the truck, but I knew I'd be soaked to the bone instantly. Risking injury or death getting over wet is something I can't really risk. I couldn't feel the rain poodling over my tent though, initially, until I focused on it. I now realise that the storm isn't letting up. The urge to get in the pickup and drive away was truly tantalising. I could get my stuff tomorrow in the daylight and spend a few nights in town. But I'd had a bit too much to drink. Driving essentially wasn't going to be a good idea, especially on the muddy 2-track road, which would have actually been a death sentence. But I still needed a safer place to stay than a wimpy tent. Grabbing what I could, I ripped open the tent flaps and ran for the truck. I was soaking wet by the time I settled into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Turning the heat on full blast, I hoped that would dry me out. It was going to be a miserable night. I reclined in my chair, then tried to calm my thoughts with deep breathing. The rain isn't letting up though. I was warm from the heater, and I was riding the crest of a good whiskey buzz, and weirdly the fire was still going strong despite the rain, and keeping my campsite well lit. I remembered the truck's clock reading 1:06 AM. I blinked. It was only a moment, but when I opened my eyes, the rain had stopped. It was foggy and quiet. The once raging campfire was just embers, and there was morning twilight to the east. The truck's clock now read 5:45 a.m. in the morning. That couldn't be right. Almost 5 hours gone in the blink of an eye. I must have passed out. My head was killing me. Now, I didn't feel like I'd drank that much to justify this feeling. I never had it before. I turned off the truck and stepped out to survey the night's damage. My tent was completely flattened. Tent poles were shattered to pieces. Everything was soaking wet. Smothering in the remains of the fire, I quickly dragged all my junk and pick up and toss things into the bed. My hike over the pass wasn't happening today. That was for sure. It was around 6:30 a.m. before I finished picking up camp. As I climbed into the cab of my truck, I heard the rumbling again through the morning fog. I drove out as fast as I could down that muddy road, not once looking back. I've never been back to that lake since. In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. These are a massive wilderness area of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts, and we were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of the summer was typical, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here is the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us total, the maximum allowed in a group per a permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adults, advisors, scoutmasters and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so a waterfall is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in path of something. We visited the falls and camped near to it. That evening, I had the boys working on camp setup while the advisors worked on fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of down trees, brush and bramble, and I could faintly hear the falls off to my left when out of nowhere I hear the most unearthly scream and roar that I've ever heard. It stops me dead in my tracks. I was frozen. The second scream is closer, and the third is closer still. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever this was, it was actually coming directly towards me now. By the fourth scream, I could actually feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I have never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream, though, actually physically hurt. It snapped me back to reality, and I ran back to camp. My crew heard it too, but what do I tell them? I claimed it was a boar. There's no boars up here, and the advisors knew I was lying, but I didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards from camp. As a rule, I'd always set up my hammock at my head height, so about 6 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and head to keep the morning dew off and mosquitoes at bay. But the tarp wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m. when I was awoken by what sounded to me like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet, so I listen, totally still, and I'm as quiet as I can be as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from the brush to granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footsteps as it walks right through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head and I couldn't see a thing. I don't know what to do. I had no time as it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing, the loud congested sound. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body. Just standing there, time to make a decision. I suddenly threw my tarp off my head, and as I did, to my left, I touched this thing's chest. Now it was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. It was muscular and impressive. Now, it all happened in a second, and as soon as my hand made contact, it actually bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such a thick thing. Now, by the time I got my headlamp and it was gone, my crew had slept through it all until the sun comes up, and I decided, well, I probably shouldn't mention this. The next day, we moved on a few miles towards base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designated by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. We were just arriving and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he starts to walk towards it. About 2 minutes later, we hear him yelling, and he come running back to camp, still pulling up his pants, and tells us that he's just seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked him if maybe it was a bear, and he said absolutely not, that he'd hunted bears for years, and it was definitely not a bear. It was a monkey, and it was about 9 feet tall. At this heightened estimate, I imagined that this was the thing that I saw by my hammock. If I touched the chest and it was 6 feet off the ground, then that puts its head at about 9 feet up. Was it stalking us? Was there more than one? The boys were now scared. Time to mitigate. I suggest a night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack up the things that we have and set out around 8 PM and paddle by a headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near to the base so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfound Lake by a small pitch and a channel of water that's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of Pinch when a rock the size of a basketball came flying out of the woods on the right side, narrowly missed the bow of the canoe that I was steering. And there's still no cliff there. This thing was forcibly thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled to base camp and ended our expedition. Now, they did not want to talk about what happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard, helping crews offload. My buddy Justin got back for that day from a trip in the same area that we had been to in Bear Loop, and as I was helping him put a boat on the rack, I noticed he had a distant stare, almost like a 1,000-yard stare. I thought this was odd, and I say to him, well, how did your trip go? And he said it was all good until they hit Knife Lake/Newfoundland Lake. He said that they thought they were being messed around with for 2 nights on Knife and actually had a rock thrown at them. Sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after that crew kept coming back from that area with solid stories matching this one. One night, there was a crowd of guides in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. You know, the screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then from the back corner of the room I hear a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who had been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time that somebody else seen one." I asked how long he'd known they were there. He said that he'd actually been encountering them for 10 years, and he said they talked to me. This shocked me, and I said, like a language? He said no, telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you, but They can read you like a book. Now, what happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatches. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me, but what really sticks with me is the way that the veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and parapsychological abilities, that they can read human emotion as clear as pages in a book, that they know our specialties and our abilities even greater than our own species ourselves. I work as a park ranger, and I had something that I experienced today which I don't quite understand. One of my other worker colleagues had told me that he'd seen something weird that he couldn't explain and wanted me to investigate too. He'd given me the exact location and said that he wasn't going to preface it, he just wanted me to go there and let him know what my experience was, and I said okay. I was actually a little bit cautious, but I'd known this colleague for a while. So I make my way over to that location and I find a door, literally in the middle of the woods, for no reason at all. It looks like quite an old door, but kind of like a grand one that you might see on an old house, and weirdly, it had one of those old door knockers. I look around and don't see anything and decide to get closer and make it up to the door. Now when I get to the door, I can hear a weird sound around it, almost like lots and lots of people whispering, but there's no one around. It's very faint but very distinct. I decide that I should maybe try and open it, but before I do, I'm kind of caught making eye contact with the knocker. It's so creepy looking. It's like an almost demon face one, but I decide to tap on it a few times to knock on the door. And as I do so, for a moment, everything changes to red and black in colour, almost like I'm looking at something through a filter. I look around and I can only describe this as being in hell. I'm in what appears to be a weird cave system or something. I can hear screams all around me, some weird dark figures moving in the distance, and there seems to be blood dripping off everything, and within a second I go back to normal, and the whispering stopped. So I very bravely sprint back and get all the way back to the station and report to my buddy what had happened. He said he didn't know what to make of it too. Now this is the weirdest part. When we went back to investigate with a group of others and were actually recording it this time, it's nowhere to be found. We gone to the exact spot that we had both seen it, and it was literally completely gone, like it never existed in the first place. I found 4 crude gravestones as a child that dated back to the 1860s deep in the woods. Now they're gone and no one seems to remember. I don't have much of a story, and the title pretty much summarizes it, but I go to this area often as an adult, but nothing's ever there like before. I remembered when I found them and showed them to my stepmom and dad. I know I did, but 25 years later they act like they have no clue what I'm talking about, as if it was all a dream. The footers of the headstones would have suggested young children. I'm not even sure if this is correct, but I'm just looking for closure. I know what I saw. I saw it multiple times. I used to spend half the day hiking there, and I'd just sit there with them as a kid. I'd like to mark those kids' graves because I feel like they deserve not to be forgotten, but no one seems to remember. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to go a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more detail that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the frogs, and the other things, it can be almost deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed out to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world, but not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and looked up and kind of noped. So I walk out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep, it's dead silent. I still remember shrugging this off and walking down my front steps and heading towards my car. When I'd gotten about 10 feet from the car, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around and see nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock landing a few feet away from me. I hit the walk and bounced into the shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever it is, you're about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to feel like maybe this was some local teenager messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned around and started walking towards my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it's right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned around and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but there's nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night sitting on a bench with my wife. She just got up and walked in to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard the panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere and it was loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped back into my home. Now at this point I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I decided to let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 PM, and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing it is. Now, me growing up in Oregon, I love the rain, and for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas where it would dump the entire year's worth of rain, but suddenly be bone dry for the rest of it. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, it was such a rare thing, and she loved going outside to watch it. So for us, this is actually an enjoyable thing, except this particular night when things took a weird turn. As we're sitting there talking about how relaxing the rain sounds, my wife stopped me and said, "Do you hear that?" "No, what did you hear?" I swear it sounded like a small child calling out for help, right in the woods. No, I didn't hear anything." And after a few moments of us listening, we hear it again, or at least she does. I say, "I don't hear a thing. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" And she looks at me offended, saying, "No, I'm positive. It was our son. I think he's out there and lost." I say, No, he's sleeping on the couch." We then both look through the blinds that were right open behind us, and we can see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounded like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. And besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to look now." At this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently and there is absolutely no one calling out for help. You stay here." At this point I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that she was 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is a child out there in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear it too. Secondly, There's no other kids around here for miles and miles, and what's the odds of them being lost out there? She said, I know, but what if it's a kid? Before I could say anything, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her again, saying, you're not getting out there. I don't know what's going on, but you need to stay inside, and it thoroughly freaks me out. A few moments after this, just as it's getting dark outside, I heard the front door open, and I get up to investigate. Now we have two twins who are 6 years old, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. That was weird, and the fact that she doesn't usually go outside without telling me. I walked out the front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our home. I asked her what she's doing. She said that no, I was just sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying in the woods. I said, seriously, and you just decide to walk off to investigate? She then looks into the woods and says, see, there it is again. And again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out there in the woods outside of our home is slim, and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, what if somebody's baby's there? I said, well, if that were true, I would hear it too. Now at this point, I was getting really worried about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, but she did. Now looking back, I felt really bad about this, but I had to do it. Now, a few days after this, we went out on the porch. It's early evening and I just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he's not to go outside of a certain area that we mapped out. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet or so from the porch, we have to be careful. So we're always cautious, and as we're talking, we both keep an eye on him. A neighbour drives by and stops to say hello. The interaction literally took 8 seconds, as of them basically asking how we are and stuff. He then says he's going to stop by later as his wife got something for the kids. And we said okay, great, and he drives off. I now look over to where that our son should be, and he's nowhere to be seen. I called out his name again and can hear his car on our side drive. I scold him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our home. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front or else, and he adamantly pointed in the direction of the woods again, kept trying to tell me something. I look off in the direction of the woods and just assumed that he saw a squirrel or deer or something and wanted to see it up close. I walk him back up to the front of the house, and he actually cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious and like most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this incident wasn't an isolated one, and both of our twins have weirdly done something similar, but not quite as extreme as this. There have actually been nights where we've just laid down and hear a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I couldn't see anything. Now the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. Now, I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked out to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlights are on again on the side of the house, and I think this is pretty weird, but I get there and there's nothing. I then walk back around the house and shine the light around intently. As I approached the backside of the house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shine the lights up the tree and don't see anything. I round the corner, and the first thing I notice is that my 3 dogs that are in my area aren't making a sound. Now our dogs have no filter and bark at everyone and everything, including me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs had me horrified, really. As I kept walking, all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs start making sounds again. It was as if that somebody flicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, okay, as long as our dogs are okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dog sleep in and with us. This very thing happened on all 4 exterior walls, not just one. It's random but annoying, but terrifying nonetheless. There's also been a few times when we're sitting in the house as I was watching a movie, and my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said that she could have sworn that she heard my name, and I said no, I didn't say anything. She said it was definitely my voice, but she doesn't understand because it sounded so close, but I was 20 feet away in a recliner. The important part to this is that she was sitting at the table doing something and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now our patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony as it has no stairs to access it. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard somebody whispering in my ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was crazy, but as you'll see, this is all tied to one final moment. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of the property next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I needed. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the range, you have the woods surrounding you on all sides except for getting back to my shop. I have to say it always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. Now one day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting a new scope on my rifle. The sun was still up, but it was going to fade soon. So I knew this was going to be the final test. Now up until this point, there was nothing really happening while I made my multiple trips down range, other than feeling weird. As I get down range, I kept getting the feeling that somebody's watching me and I can't shake it. I look around and don't see a thing. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off the side behind me. It sounded like a large branch snapping off a tree. Now if you've been in Tennessee before in the woods, you know that this happens a lot, especially in the middle of nowhere. So this is nothing new, except for this time it was very loud and it sounded like fresh strong wood, if that makes sense. I turned around again but can't see anything. I start walking back up to my rifle and I swear I heard somebody right behind me. I turned around again but saw nothing. As I start to walk again, I hear this deep growl. It really sounds deep and loud, and what's worse is that it's actually all around me. I turned around facing the range and start walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging me is really terrifying, but I know running's not a good idea if this is the case. So I walked slowly backwards up the hill with my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever this thing is. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag quickly, going back up to the house. Now fast forward to roughly a year later, when we moved in and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money. We're on our way back from the store about a mile from our house and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It caught my attention because they were higher than a deer but a different size and colour. Just as I said, "What's that?" they squint and vanish. I had made a comment that it was almost as though it had known that I could see its size and suddenly moved. The colour was kind of golden green, but they resembled the mannerisms of a large cat and felt ominous. It's really hard for me to explain, but I really can't define exactly what I saw. It's truly like nothing else. Now, a few moments later, when we arrive at the house, as we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son come bolting out of the house excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in the bags, I heard my dog growl. I look in the direction she was looking, and it's at my neighbour's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up till this point, I've always been skeptical that anything was out there, as I've never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Now, my street is on a kind of spread out neighbourhood. Each house actually sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. Our neighbour's house sits adjacent to the house on an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres which are untouched. As I was looking across the street to my neighbour's property, I see a large dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly. Then it came into clear view and stood up. At first, it looks like a man, almost walking like one, and I don't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange is that the distance it covered was really not possible to be made by a human. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than anyone can sprint. More importantly, there's no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality when it moved. I shout out, "What is that?" and realise that it's looking directly at us. It's moved at such a crazy angle that it's minimising its body now to not be seen so well, suddenly going silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realised that whatever it is stalking us. I tell my niece to go in the house now, and I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out the car. Knowing her, I tell her very firmly that you have to get back in the house. Her disregard to my command annoyed me, but I still watch over her without saying a word as she was slowly walking. She turned around towards the woods and across the street from my house, and then suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the stairs in a panicked state, and she said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves. When I turned around, I heard a deep growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said that she thought I was talking to the sun. I told her about what I'd seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see anything. I told her it's not a good idea, but she goes anyway. She begins walking down the walkway, and I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come and take the flashlight. Now at this point, she's about 3 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught the glimpse of something grey and hairy bolt from the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this thing is, cleared about 45 feet in what appears to be a single jump. It moves honestly like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped in front of the car and caught my line of sight and was waiting for her. Now, for whatever reason, she still doubted my warnings and grabs a flashlight and walks back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stops dead in her tracks, leaning forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw, and she turned and ran back on the porch terrified, saying, "No, no, no." She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree, and she saw its eyes. I asked her what do they look like, and she said dull red at first, but as she gets closer it appears almost dead. She said it kind of looked really dark grey and was hard to describe, but the pupils were looking like something that's blind. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree again. I said, "Get inside now." I went in and locked the door and look and see a tall human-shaped being, looking really tall and ominous as anything. The next morning, we actually do a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it, and it must have been about 9 feet, and apparently its eyes are about 6 feet apart. At this point, I don't know what that thing is, and after doing some research, I think it was maybe a crawler or glimmerman. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in my area, but none. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out of almost like a shadow person or being. Now, I don't know what to make of this, and I don't know if this thing could communicate telepathically somehow, because it would explain how I always had a weird feeling and could hear things, or my wife would at least. Secondly, it has like a playback communication, so when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of the dogs that this had heard and then replicated somehow, and the same again with some of my children. Now, it really scares me. I hate the fact that I've seen something like this. Now, the more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there's a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the properties on our road is undeveloped owned land, and no one on these actually goes to live there, but there's a sign that says Screamer lives here, with an arrow pointing into the woods. Now, I have to admit that when I first saw the sign, I actually laughed, thinking it was maybe the owner screamed at trespassers, but now I'm not so sure. I have some stories to share. They're all true, but I don't know, I'll start with the weirdest one first. When I was like 5, my parents had bought a house with a large yard, about an acre back, and there's a forest. One day, my granny was babysitting me. I decided to run around the backyard and play. She went inside to go to the bathroom. I remembered something beckoning me to go into the forest. Just a strong urge, so I do. I didn't go in very far before coming across a perfectly circular area filled with flowers. The sun was shining on it through the trees. It was so bright, and they're all different colours. There was a buck standing in the middle of it staring at me. I was a little confused, and it looks huge to me. I got a bit closer and it didn't run. It just watches me. I got so excited about the beautiful scene that I actually ran back to tell my granny. When I did, she was looking at me horrified, saying, "Where did you go?" I was looking everywhere and got worried sick. Apparently I'd been gone for a long time. I was confused. Now, regardless, I insisted on showing her what I found. She followed me into the woods, and we went past where all the wildflowers were and some of the deers are. Now, we were exactly where I was, but it was gone. I swore up and down to tell her about what I found, but it just wasn't there now. I remembered being really upset and confused. To this day, I wonder if I walked into some kinds of portal or dimension. When I turned 13, we lived elsewhere, but I started having dreams about a single door in the middle of the woods. It was reoccurring for a number of years and really makes you wonder what's actually out there. I remembered there was a light snowfall the previous day on this particular patrol. There was nothing I had to worry about really. Every so often I'd have to come to the rescue of people that got lost. Usually it was just tourists that would come to our country and want to be out in the snow and forest and not really be prepared for it. They'd often be very cold and not well equipped for the weather. It could be especially easy to get some kind of frostbite out here. Now, it's always cold all year round, but it can be especially nasty in winter. So that was what I was expecting most of my day to be like. Now, I remembered I had the occasional urge to look over my shoulder, but I fought against it. The scenery was okay. It wasn't so great today. A lot of the snow had went a bit slushy. Water was frozen and the paths were a bit muddy too. Every so often I would see some hikers and I'd say hello to them. Often they'd get confused about where they needed to go, and it was my job to redirect them into the right areas of the wilderness where they were allowed to go. Now, eventually I have to get a bit further away from people, because I need to go to the outskirts of where my ranger station patrols. This is where we'd get the most weird activity. Every so often we'd hear things in the night here that we couldn't pin down to a particular animal. All of the animals that we get here should be pretty scared of us, but I don't know. It seemed like you could almost guarantee that when you went here around 12 at night, you would hear a strange animal call that sounded very big. It sounded like a very large creature had to make it, so yeah, I was always cautious while being here. I eventually come up to the very perimeter of where I need to patrol and go through the gate. I'm now away from the people and the atmosphere is a lot different. Because of this being in close proximity to water, there was almost a mist covering everything. I think it's called sea drift, but I don't actually know the correct term for it. But I start making my way through the trees and I'm just having my general search. I have another buddy that's working with me and he's covering the area that I've come from, so I feel pretty safe to be out here and freely roam around. All of the trees here don't have any leaves on them, so it means that if you're not careful, one of the branches will get you in the face or neck, so I'm constantly cautious of this. I eventually make it through to a clearing and all is as it should be. I have the body of water to my right, and I'm just conscious to make sure I don't get too close to it, because sometimes it can be deceiving how close you are to danger. Now, I do notice something's odd. The gate that I've just come from is now open, which is pretty bizarre. I look around and I'm convinced that I closed it. In fact, I even remembered the sound of it closing. But when I've looked back, it's 100% open, and I know for a fact that I haven't done it. So I think this is odd. I quickly just have a look around to make sure that nobody's actually followed me in, but there's no one whatsoever. But I try my best not to let it bother me and just think, well, it was probably just in my head, and I guess the gate flung itself open again. I ended up going a little bit deeper in now. Now, I'm getting further and further away from the water, so it's getting a bit less and less misty, and this makes me feel more confident. I'm now into an area that's basically only used by us. It's where we have like a large cabin shed thing. I don't know what you guys call it again, maybe what you guys refer to as a barn, but it's basically where that we keep all of our equipment that we're not using. We had some pretty cool things here too. We actually had like a little ATV and off-road thing that we would use sometimes to rescue people, or just as like a rapid response thing, but we've got no need to use it this particular day, so I just continue up ahead like normal. Now eventually I get to the very end of where I need to patrol, and that's when I hear it, the sound. Ah yes, the sound that we've grown so accustomed to, and one that I'm not actually scared of now. I call back and say, hey, are you going to show yourself today or what? I don't say it in English but my own language, but the sound stops immediately and I kind of laugh to myself thinking, well, today I'm going to dance with this thing. Now I continue on as I do the last part of my rounds until I notice something's up ahead of me. I can see quite a tall creature standing roughly where the shoreline is of the body of water. It looks almost like a snowman, but more similar to a tree in terms of its exterior. This thing doesn't move an inch, and I start walking towards it confident that this is just a person that's hunting and shouldn't be here. I call out, hey, you're not supposed to be hunting here. I actually managed to jog all the way up to this thing without it moving an inch. Until then, it just takes off and heads straight towards the water. I suddenly realised that this isn't actually a hunter, and this is something different. I realised because when it's wading through into the icy waters, it isn't shuddering at all, and it literally just disappears down into the lake. Now, while doing so, I realised that there's a really bad smell around, and I can still see this thing moving underwater, and I now get the scowl of it because I've come much closer. It was probably about 6.5 or 7 feet tall, absolutely massive. It's actually swimming more like a fish now that it's underwater, until it stops and stares at me, and its eyes are almost glowing a yellowy orange colour. I was extremely brave and decided to sprint out of there and get all the way back to the station. I radio in what I saw, and some of the guys go out to try and investigate. They say they can't see anyone, just the tracks of somebody or something coming out of the water, getting to the exact spot that I saw this thing at, and then disappearing. But the worst part about it is, all of them think that I made up the story and that I was lying to them, trying to pull a quick one on them. But I know what I saw that day. I haven't seen it since, but it's still really weird. I was travelling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quintenot for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the river. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked as though it might collapse if you try and cross it, so I decided against it. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided I needed to get into the water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction that I would need to leave. I then start hiking through the thick brush, down an embankment and to the edge of the water. It was mid-fall, and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I took my clothes off and got in there. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I'm being watched, even though I'm in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river and walked back to where my clothes and shoes are. When I turned around, there was a big tall man standing in plain sight, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on the embankment, and I didn't notice him at first. He's wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked as though he'd been living out in the wild for a long time. We stood and stared at each other, well, me froze in terror really, for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off on foot to the bridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car keys, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything. I went running for my life through the thick brush, blackberries, barefoot, and in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he's gonna hurt me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see that he was crossing the bridge towards me more rapidly. I get to my car, flung the door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as quick as I can. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have ran after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running through the blackberries. I was unclothed, shaken and crying. Had I have hesitated for 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have got out of there alive. Even typing out this story all these years later is actually making me shake. I will never ever go back to that area, and since that moment I always bring a hiking buddy with me to be safe. Now I was in Yellowstone riding a bicycle fast down a great curve. Cars are stopped. I look up ahead and there's a grizzly. I could have easily hit into the cars or the grizzly bear itself. I'm just glad that I made it out of there okay. Now once I was driving into Yosemite at 4 AM and saw something in the road as I come around a corner. I slammed on my brakes and it turned out to be a wolf. Several years later, I mentioned this to someone offhand and they said Yosemite didn't have any wolves. I looked it up and they have exactly one wolf in the park. I realised that I nearly prowled into this one single wolf and I'm very glad that I managed not to. Once while in a national park, I was chilling in a hammock and my family started yelling at me to run away. Turns out, there was a bear right near me. I slowly walk away and the bear actually went inside my hammock to start eating different things there.